Hello, curious people. Today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So, before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable. Now I stepped into the stories. I've been cleaning roadkill for about 10 years now, and I can honestly say it's a job I enjoy. It's one of those things you get used to. You know, you're out on the road, you do your work, you move on. Nothing fancy, but it's satisfying in a strange way. I've worked all over the country, different states, different highways. It's always the same, but always a little different too. People think it's a pretty straightforward gig, and for the most part, it is. But every now and then, you come across something that makes you stop and take a second look. Take the staged roadkill, for example. I've seen it enough that I know what it looks like. These are the animals that seem out of place for some reason. Usually it's deer, though it could be other things too. But what's odd is that they're always missing their left antler. It's not like they were hit by a car and lost it in the collision. It's just gone. And sometimes the animal looks like it's been set up, arranged in a certain way, wounds clean, like they were intentionally made that way. Then there are the ones with stitches in them. I've found that more than once. Like someone decided to patch the animal up and drop it by the side of the road. It's not something you see every day, but I've seen it enough to know it's not just a one-off. Then there are the pelts. You wouldn't think you'd find just a pelt, but I've seen it. Fur, perfectly skinned, laid out neatly on the side of the road. There's no body, no blood, just the fur. Not sure how a car's supposed to do that, but I've come across it more than a few times. Some of the pelts even have stitches in them, which is always a little strange. But like I said, this job comes with its own set of weird things, and that's one of them. The sorta deer is another thing we joke about at work. Every time we get a call, it's the same thing, some sort of deer. It's not always a deer, but it's close enough that you can tell what they mean. But when you get there, you know right away. It's not quite right. It might be the way it's standing, or the way it's shaped, but something about it's just off. Missing legs, fur that doesn't look quite right. It's enough for us to call it the sorte deer. Nothing alarming, just a weird little pattern that's popped up enough times that we've given it a name. One thing that's always a bit strange is the disappearing roadkill. It's not like I've never seen a body vanish, but it happens. You'll pull up to a spot, there's a fresh carcass, blood, tire marks. It's all there, but the moment you turn your back for a second, go grab your supplies. When you come back, it's gone. The tire tracks and blood are still there, but no body, not even a sign of it being moved. I've seen it enough times that I'm not surprised by it anymore. I just note it down and keep going. Happens more than you'd think, especially on certain stretches of highway. You learn which ones to watch out for. And then there's the hitchhikers. You meet a lot of them doing this kind of work. Most are just looking for a ride, maybe a story or two along the way. But some of them are a little too interested in the animals we clean up. They'll stand there watching us, asking questions about the roadkill, the injuries, how we do our work. Some get in the way more than others, and I've had my fair share of them standing too close, watching too intently. It's not that it bothers me, but it does stand out. Most people don't care that much about the carcasses, but these ones seem to Anyway, it's a job. It's a job that gets repetitive, but there's always something a little offbeat about it. I've seen a lot of weird things on these roads, but I don't really think too much about it anymore. It's just another part of the work, and at the end of the day, the road's a little cleaner, and I can keep moving on to the next one. You live through it 100 times, then you live through it 1,000 more. That's when you're awake. When you're asleep is when it gets weird. The events replay, like usual. You notice where you screwed up and what happened because of it, but for some reason, your ex is there with famous cartoon characters, and they're all just watching you with blank faces that have eyes the size of footballs, while the tragedy you survived is happening in the background. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but I've been living through that night back in Doug's grave more times than I can count. Back in December, I went down to the town where my grandfather spent his entire life up until his death a week before. We all saw it coming in the family, but we figured he had another year left in him, and I thought I had more time to figure out what I would do with my new debt and degree. Since everyone else in the family were halfway across the world in countries I've never heard of, it was dropped into my lap to handle my grandfather's house until the funeral could be arranged and the family could come back to the USA to handle all the legal stuff. So, until then, I was stuck in a house that was in a town I hadn't been in since I was 3 years old. It was one of them older style houses, the type where it's pointy, has 2 floors, and the windows look like tall mirrors. When the sun hits it right, the insides were nice and clean. Surprisingly, my grandfather Herman was a secret neat freak, I suppose. The only thing making the place less than pristine was the dust and my presence. The first few days were all right. My grandfather's place didn't have the 80-inch TV I was used to, nor did he have the fast internet I took for granted back home. Instead, I had local access TV and the neighbor's internet to pass the time. I scrolled the usual places while Jorge's World History played in the background. I was in the middle of reading an article about a gaming studio being able to mimic a player's playstyle to create a nemesis when I heard a knock at the door. It was a single thud of a knock, enough to make me whip my head toward the living room. I got up and walked toward the front door as another thud hit. As I looked through the peephole, I could see 3 older people outside the door with an aluminum tray and a small cake. Before they could knock again, I opened the door. "Hello, how may I help you?" I asked the closest one. He was a tall man with gray curly hair that was neatly trimmed. He hunched a bit to look me in the eye. "Hello, young man. We were friends of Herman. We noticed the lights were on and put 2 and 2 together. We're sorry for your loss, and we wanted to let you know that we are here if you've got any questions, troubles that need fixing, or you just need the company." His voice was gravelly, sounded like he never had air in his lungs, but his smile was warm and inviting. I opened the door to let who I would soon learn to be Quentin, Mary, and Trujillo in. Quentin was the tall one. Mary was a shorter woman with a short, brown bob cut. She looked younger than the other 2 men, and Trujillo was about the same height as me. He wore a gray hunting cap, and his beard was as long as my forearm. We spent a few hours talking about my grandfather, eating the ham sandwiches they made, along with the cake that had frosting spelled out, "Our condolences" in cursive. I learned that the grandfather I barely spent time with was an avid collector of fancy knickknacks. He was a man who couldn't be outdrank, and he was a big fan of Asian Kung Fu Generation. After we were done, they asked me something that I wish I knew myself. Throughout the night, they all looked like they wanted to ask, but Mary was the one who got to it first. Can we know how Hermann passed away? All we know is that, obviously, he's not here with us anymore, and he just seemed like a modern day titan. You know, he once lifted a whole couch for us to go stargazing out back, just hucked the whole thing over his shoulder like it was nothing. Quentin laughed and patted her back. I'm sorry, but I don't know myself. All I know is what you know, I answered, as I tried looking into all three of their faces. One day, I'm at my dishwashing job, and then the next, I'm here. Quentin and Mary seemed to have sympathetic faces, but Trujillo had a poker face so firm that I'm sure he'd be kicked out of every casino in Vegas. Mr. Trujillo, I locked eyes with him, or at least tried to. It's like he was looking past me. Do you know something? I turned to look where his gaze fell. His eyes never moved away from the back door down the hall. No, son. I'm just thinking about that couch and my talks with Herman. We would stay out there for hours in the night. Just us and more than a couple of bottles. Bottles of what? I wondered aloud. Bottles, he said, with a monotone voice. And before I could ask him to clarify, Quentin placed his hand onto Trujillo's shoulder. Well, I think we've wasted enough of this boy's time. It's getting rather late, and if we stay here any longer, my wife will be rather furious, as will your husband Trujillo. Mary quickly added in. I watched as they all stood up, took their coats, and then walked out of the door. Good night, Jeremy. Lock this door, please, Aunt Quentin said as he closed the door behind him. I watched them walk away, and then split off into different houses across the street. I had a weird feeling coming up. Trujillo barely spoke, and the minute he does, Quentin makes them all leave. I get it. Some people just don't speak. But there was something about Trujillo that made me think I should open up that back door and see what was out there. Up until this night, I never went out the back. On the drive, I didn't see anything. Out there in the backyard, the clean house made me think that Grandpa just kept his backyard as neat as his house. But as I opened up that cool-to-the-touch glass and wooden door, I saw it, the green couch in the backyard. It looked like it was picked straight out of the store, clean and seemingly immune to the elements. It was as if the fog was avoiding it, refusing to even obscure the couch. Then there was the heat. I could feel it slowly warming the front of my body. It was 48 Fahrenheit outside, but this green couch was insanely hot enough to reach me from 20 feet away. I stepped through the threshold, curious. A strange sound happened behind me as soon as my left foot landed onto the grass in the backyard. A mixture of clicks and chimes, like some ancient instrument playing a foul note. I looked behind me and saw nothing but the sun resting on the horizon, its soft orange light making the miles and miles of amber grasses glow. The house was gone. The white square fence and the green couch was still there with all of its heat. But my grandpa's house, my car, the entire neighborhood was gone. Despite all the pinching, I was not waking up from this dream where winter became warm, muggy summer. In my increasing panic, I was trying to think of what to do. But before I could make any sort of plan, I heard a roar in a distant forest, and when I saw the trees crashing over, I started to panic. Something was aware that I was here, and it was absolutely pissed about it. A cold sweat started on my forehead, and it felt hard to breathe. Panicking, I mindlessly turned to the couch as if it would save me and saw them, Trujillo's bottles. I could hear the roar coming closer, stomping heavy, stomping towards me. I picked one up at random. It was unlabeled and warm. The liquid inside was a burgundy red with gray specks floating around inside. The stomping was now close enough for me to feel the vibrations. I didn't know what to do. My brain was thinking of 1,000 meaningless things. Was time passing the same back? Home? How would One Piece end? I never wrote a book. I never kissed anyone yet. Would that chick text me back? Would my asshole roommate back home ever stop using my books as a fucking ashtray? All these stupid thoughts combined in an instant into the only thing that made sense in that moment. I turned around and threw the bottle at whatever creature was behind me. I think maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was my mind demanding a solution. Either way, I watched as the bottle flew towards it in slow motion. The creature looked like TV static, an amorphous blob of black and white shivering, its very being making my clothes and my body hair thrust forward toward it. The sinking sun's light seemed to be swallowed by it, like it had many hungry mouths, sucking in all the light it could get. I couldn't really get a good grip on its shape. It all looked like it blended together. But something in my lizard brain could recognize that it was reaching out to me with a wide grasp. I felt like my head was going to explode from the stress. My body was itchy and painful. This was it. I'm going to die. And then the bottle hit. The glass shattered into a glitter, and the red liquid carved through the body of the thing, causing it to let loose a wet shriek that covered me head to toe. By the time I realized I was covered in wet gunk that smelled like shit, the thing was gone. The trees in the forest were moving again. I could only guess it retreated back there. I stood up and looked at the bottle of stuff that saved my life. It wasn't burgundy red anymore. It was now lime green, the same shade as the couch. I turned around to the couch and saw something strange. You would think at this point I'd be rolling with the weirdness, but I could never have expected to see that Trujillo's bottles were hooked up to the couch with these little metal spigots. The couch was pumping out this mystery juice. It smelled like vinegar and puke, and now it was gathering into a puddle on the floor where the missing bottle was. It slowly ate away at the dirt, a splot-shaped hole sinking into the earth. I definitely wasn't going to touch it. I spent some time, 20 minutes give or take, trying to make my heart stop boxing my ribcage and thinking about what to do. I kept looking at how there was miles of dirt everywhere, except for the forest where the monster came from. I could choose a random direction of dirt to head in and hope there would be something, or I could head into the one place that had danger so that I could find something. I decided on the forest, since I didn't like the idea of my skeleton cartoonishly being blown by the wind somewhere in the dust. I don't know how long the walk took, but the sun was nearly gone when I entered the forest. Light pollution was something that I always forgot existed. Spending most of my life in towns had cemented in my head the idea the world was just perpetually bright always. The obvious was now surrounding me. Light pollution was real, and it was not here to help me now. The forest was dark, the only light being the fading sun shafts above me. I didn't know what I was doing, or what I should be doing, until my foot stepped into something warm. I felt a small shock climb up my right leg, gone as fast as it came. I looked down and saw the static trail left behind from the monster. I followed it, making sure to avoid stepping into any more of the fading television liquid. The soft hum of the static growing louder the more I wandered deeper into the woods. When the sun was finally gone, leaving me with nothing but trees and the soft white light from the blood, I heard a ringtone further in. I didn't understand the Japanese, but I knew by the song it was Grandpa's phone. A short while later, and I came up onto the remains of a destroyed cabin. There was a tiny light resting on what looked like an air mattress. The screen on the phone read, Mark. I picked up the phone and whispered hello, Jeremy. Listen, don't even talk. You need to find a blanket that has a dark blue panther on it. If it's not in the cabin, it's out the back door in the neighborhood somewhere. Once you have the blanket, go back to the couch. My hairs started to stand, the hum of the static growing louder. Trujillo, what the fuck is happening? What's going on? By the time I said going, Trujillo had hung up, and I could feel the back of my shirt being gently tugged. I jumped over the lime green air mattress and quickly searched the cabin. The living room, what was left of it, only had the mattress and a mini fridge. The kitchen was clean, and the cabinets only had polished dishes. When I rushed into the bedroom, it looked like a near one-to-one duplicate of Grandpa's guest room. Popcorn ceiling, a fan with a broken light bulb, and that same itchy rug that made getting out of the twin bed uncomfortable. The static was getting more painful. I frantically pulled out drawers, looked under the bed and the closet. No blanket. Before I left to run out of the back door, there was a note under the light switch near the guest room door. It said, Stolas, HFWF22. It takes bravery to live. I should have taken the note, but fizzy anxiety was drowning my brain. At that moment, I just wanted to be away from the static. When I finally got out of the house, I saw the neighborhood, Grandpa's neighborhood. It looked nearly exactly how I remembered it, save for the fact that it was surrounded by the woods. Before I could question it, my legs were carrying me toward the suburb. But in my fervor to get away from the monster, my foot got caught in a small hole. I tripped and fell all the way down the hill. Every few seconds, I felt nature punch me in a new spot. When I reached the end of the slope, the pain felt like it was a mixture of thorns and burns, but a mixture of annoyed, adrenaline, and anger forced me up into the street. My body felt sore, and it felt like bones would poke my skin in a threatening way if I stepped wrong. And with every step, I could see droplets of red fall onto the asphalt. It was definitely the pain, the focusing to stay awake, that distracted me from what was happening. The wood creaked, the glass shattered and reformed. The street signs had their letters morph into new ones. That didn't matter to me. At that moment, I was nothing more than a simple machine with one order in its head: keep stepping forward. I should have known that when a house appeared in front of me, that things were wrong. I mindlessly opened the door, desperate for rest, and stepped inside. My shoes were off and on the rack, and I found my way to the rug that my father picked up off the street and cleaned. I didn't know how to let myself gently down, so I just fell onto my face. Familiar feel and smell. The rug made falling asleep in my childhood home easy, better than any sleeping pill. In my foggy dreams that night, I saw my grandfather Herman. He was impaled on a cross spear in the middle of some graveyard, the flag of his nation draped over him. His eyes were wildly alive, darting from place to place until he finally saw me. He mouthed something to me, something I knew to be important. But when I woke up, I couldn't remember what he was trying to tell me. I was still hurt, but I forced myself up when I heard Grandpa's phone ringing again. In the kitchen, on the countertop next to multigrain bread, was the phone. Instead of Marka, this one was from Quentin. "You all right, son?" Quentin asked as I put the phone on speaker. "No, I don't know what's going on, and I'm badly hurt. I knew this would happen. I should have warned you, but who would believe an old man when he brings up magic? Quentin, I don't care at this point. I need medical help, and I don't think there's doctors in this weird Silent Hill ripoff. Do me a favor and tell me a bad memory of yours." "What?" "Just tell me, Jeremy. A bad memory. Were you bullied? Did you ever get dumped?" Feeling more of myself pouring out, my body threatening to collapse, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. Juan in the first grade stole my limited run card of Terence Phobos. I remember seeing him take it, but I didn't say anything because I breathed in wrong, started coughing. Quentin sounded panicked and urged me to continue. "Please, son, finish your memory." I didn't confront him because Juan was the only kid in class who'd talk to me. I thought being friends with someone like me meant that things like that happened, like I had to pay a tax to have friends. Quentin quickly asked me, "How did that make you feel? Did you ever get over it?" I remember answering this before. When I went to therapy, after what happened in December 2017, I told Quentin the same thing I told my therapist. It made me feel pathetic. Then I got angry about it. I was angry that I let myself be hurt just to have someone spend time with me. I decided a week later that I deserved better, that I am better even if everyone in that class thought I was a loser. I never got that card back, but Juan never tried anything after I told him off and dumped milk on his head. Then, my body felt a warm, almost burning sensation. It started from my feet all the way to my head, culminating in a headache. Quentin must have heard me groaning because he started chuckling a bit. He asked, "Feel better?" I checked myself, and I was still hurt, but now I wasn't leaking all over the place. "Yeah," I answered. "I do feel better. I'm still hurt, but now I'm not bleeding. My head feels funny, though." Quentin stopped chuckling and said, "I'm on limited time, but I'm glad I could help you. Listen, it's not going to be easy, but you need to do it, especially if you ever want to get out." Before I could ask what it was, Quentin hung up. I tried picking up the phone to keep this time, maybe try to call Quentin back, but I felt a squish in my hands when I gripped it. The phone was a cake. I didn't know how to feel. I just laughed a bit. Spending all those nights studying, I never would have guessed I'd be here in this situation. It wasn't the weird static monster or the one-to-one replica of my grandpa's neighborhood. It was the fact that I was back in the kitchen where I watched my father cook dinner every night. Everything was how I remembered it, except for the door at the end of the hall. When I climbed the stairs to visit my old room, I saw a dirty steel door and it was cracked open, frozen. I must have stared at that door for what felt like hours, but in reality was a few minutes. In that time, I watched as the door slowly creaked open, enough to have the light show off what looked like a closet with a blanket inside, the dark blue panther blanket. But when I walked forward to pick up the blanket, I felt the air die with each step. The air smelled stale. My skin prickled whenever I moved, and there was no sound. The sensation grew stronger the closer I got to the blanket Trujillo commanded me to retrieve. And when I reached for it, the front of the house was sucked into a typhoon of splintered wood and ruptured metal. Then it was blown back towards me as I heard the roar of the thing that had been hunting me since I was trapped here. I didn't need to look back to confirm the thing's presence. I could feel the shocking and stinging grasp of it reaching out for me. I ran towards the steel door and rushed inside to grab the blanket. When my hand felt the soft, embroidered panther, my stomach felt a jump, like when you're in a fast elevator and it starts going down. The sound outside died as the doctor slammed shut. When I looked up from that short moment, I was back near the couch. Miles of dirt and amber grasses with the sun rising into the sky, worrying about the monster, somehow rushing back to me. I sat down on the couch with the blanket. Another series of clicks and chimes played, and when I blinked, I was somewhere new. A dark forest, the only source of light being the moon, and a computer sitting on a desk in front of me. This is where I've been for however long I've been here. I can't really tell since the moon, and its night feel like it never moves, but it doesn't feel long. It hasn't been long enough for my body to completely heal. I'm still sore whenever I move, in any way that doesn't involve lying down on the warm couch. And strangely enough, I'm not hungry or thirsty. Neither Quentin nor Trujillo have contacted me, and the computer only has one app. This app. I've been reading a blank white page that I've been using to record how I got here, what I've been doing, and whatever else that comes to mind. In other words, I've been living through it 100,000,000,000 times, both awake and asleep. If I'm not asleep on the lime green couch, exploring the forest, then I'm writing here. It would be mundane, but recently I've been losing time. Every day, night, I wake up. I feel like something is missing from my head. I feel like they're important. So I've just been writing down any and everything that I think is important. It all feels like random bullshit, but I'm scared of losing everything that I am, especially because it feels like someone is leaving me notes. When I check the computer, sometimes they're in the middle of a sentence, or they're a whole entry by itself. Today's note is the reason I've sat down and rewrote all of this. It was after I was writing about how I saw a light in the woods, that I saw it at the end of the page. Herman Fabaker is alive. Don't trust your family. Don't trust anyone. I am writing this in a hurry. Please excuse my ramblings. I might not have any other chance. I took another MRI, a now standard monthly checkup. Something was definitely wrong. I'd scrutinize the X-ray of my brain every month, so the slight change stood out like a crater in the middle of New York. I'd also X-rayed my family and anyone else I could find around town. I knew what the illness looked like, and unfortunately, where it led. Before communication disappeared completely, the internet flooded with chat rooms and forums devoted to teaching ways to identify, manage, and record changes in brain health. Most of it was bullshit or unhelpful, but I printed everything I could find. A wild storm leaked through our roof and drenched a few boxes holding the printouts before I could save the rest. I don't know what I lost, what I am now missing. There will always be that gap in my understanding now. Could the gap have been filled with a cure? That thought nearly sent me over the edge. My stupidity, dooming the world, all on my own. I can't explain what it is, why it happened, or where it spread. What felt like only a few weeks. The world just forgot. Alzheimer's, dementia, maybe amnesia, just snuffed out everyone's memories. Left alone and unaffected, I've kept as many alive as I can. I can see them, touch them, try to communicate, but there is no one here. I've read and watched every survival book or movie I can, but I'm under no threat, no real danger. They smile as I walk past. They might even wave. No roaming bandits to rob and kill me. No starved zombies trying to eat my brain. There are just people here. Wind-spinning turbines keep the shop lights on and the streets are clean. But I feel stranded, alone among my friends and family, slowly slipping into the darkness. I have stopped trying to help them, to force them to remember or change. Early on, I would record the days, record everything, and play it back to the group every morning. Who knew Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore would give me the most guidance at the end? Like a teacher, I walked and pointed at the screen, trying to force the memories back into their minds, seeing if anything would ever take hold. After my family and our neighbors, even out towards town, started getting sick, I could never leave for any period of time. Leaving would be a disaster. A whole town, unable to communicate, feed and bathe themselves. Even for a day, there would be no one left. The lost hours here and there have turned to days. A week at its worst. Spoon-feeding my high school English teacher. It felt like I was holding a block of lead. I saw I was shaking, trying to hold the spoon up. I started crying. I didn't even realize until she started to cry too. A response mechanism, mirroring behavior like a baby. It has been almost a year now. There were days where I felt hope for sure. I found my mother one morning at our old home's front door. She was trying to get in. I nearly gave her a heart attack with my scream of joy. Jumping up and down, I squeezed her so hard. That was it. I stopped to look at her. She had drifted away again. Across my hands, so many small scars and scratches. It's only natural to lash out when scared, driven by confusion. I understand that. While feeding the town, I have been stabbed, punched, and beaten by classmates, their parents, the church pastor, the elderly couple that lived behind our house in the dilapidated but homely cottage. I could kill them all so easily. I think about the cities, filled with people, collapsing in on themselves, starving, decaying. If it's spread this far, they're probably all gone by now. There might be hope left in the cities or their hospitals. Maybe there's still medicine or something that can buy them time. Or maybe the cities are doing fine, seeing our town as lost and not worth saving. Have I been alone, stuck in the desert while the rest of the country watches? Do they whisper about it over coffee on their way to work? Once reality sets in, they'll say it's just too much trouble to help. Sometimes I think I am just as dangerous to these people, their unwilling caretaker, forced to nurture the remains of humanity, if it really is still humanity. I sometimes see these people, my family and neighbors, as animals. I'm the last shepherd, hoarding these sick sheep. There are no wolves. Why am I doing this? There were urges. I fought for years. Isolation and puberty. What came to feel like my own disease? I won't say what I've done, but just please know that I regret it all. But I can't apologize. The anger, the frustration, and outrage. I wasn't always able to keep it inside. I'm sorry. Please know that I truly never meant to hurt any of them. I think about the people who used to hit their dogs, that unassuming animal that doesn't understand what's being done. Can I put them down, save them from a certain suffering and death? I don't know if I can leave them how I found them, leaving them to fend for themselves, like a child, alone and confused. You don't abandon a helpless animal. Is not ending it for them now the truly evil option? But if I do, if I found a cure or worse, find out I was fine, what then? That my thrown together medical understanding has led me wrong, and there is nothing to fear. If I end it for them to find out there was no reason to leave, will I have doomed them and cursed myself? Not cursed to deteriorate physically, to have my mind waste away, but internally, to fight with what I have done, till I may as well have lost my mind, just like the rest of them. But if I don't, if I leave them as they are, just with the hope they do not have the ability to comprehend, and I never return, the thoughts of my family, friends, the town I have grown up in, protected, kept alive all these years, to rot away in the dark. But in the end, will they ever really know? This could just be a scream into nothing. There is no one truly left here, and I'm just left to turn off the lights and lock up before leaving. I'm writing this all down from the front seat of my family's Range Rover. I don't know how many times I have written this note. I've put down a notebook too many times, unable to remember where. I can barely remember starting this note, unsure where these memories have come from. I don't know how long I've been sitting here, or if I will ever leave. Derek has always been a nice guy. He would not hesitate to help anyone in need. He would always help an old lady cross the road. He likes to spare some food to go, so he can give some to any homeless man, woman in the streets. And he never raises his voice. He was always gentle with everyone he knows. And he cares dearly for all animals. One day, news came that a burglary happened in our neighborhood. The Johnsons from 2 blocks away had their jewelry stash taken. They were devastated, since they were currently burdened by hospital bills from their ill daughter. Judging by the design of our houses here, a simple breaking of the window becomes a red carpet for the culprit. My husband was worried someone would steal his anime figurine collection, to which I raised an eyebrow and said that unless the burglar is a weeb, no one would bat an eye even if it's displayed outside. Can't reject the possibility of a weeb burglar though, he said, as he was shopping online for a CCTV camera set. He decided to install CCTV cameras around our home. He said that even if we can't stop the burglary, at least we have evidence for the insurance, or in the best case scenario, get a glimpse of the burglar's face so the police can catch him. The camera he bought was one of those that have a 2-way audio. He would sometimes try to be silly and say, "Hey, beautiful," through the camera speakers whenever I would enter the gate, then be greeted with a surprise hug inside the house. He was such a sweet guy, and I always thought to myself how lucky I am to have him. The tranquility of my life with him was broken when I came home from work and I saw police cars parked outside my house. My whole world came crumbling apart when they said my husband didn't make it. They said someone stabbed him 6 times inside our house, took his wallet, and just ran away. The police told me to give them a copy of the footage of the CCTV camera, which I completely forgot existed. Dread immediately came over me. Knowing the love of your life was murdered is one thing, but seeing them get killed on camera is another level of emotional trauma I never imagined to experience. The police said they will give me time to calm down and will come back the next day for the copy. They said they will place a patrol outside my house for a week to monitor suspicious activities. After all, the murderer got away. After I went home from the morgue, I gathered all that was left of me and played the last recording of my husband. He was humming one of his favorite songs while cleaning the porch, when suddenly someone was walking towards our gate, limping and repeatedly saying, "Help me." I leaned closer to the screen to make out the face of the assailant. He was wearing a black cap and had a face mask on. My hope of catching my husband's murderer vanished. I continued to watch the footage. The man was desperately asking for help from my husband. He said that he was in pain. My husband, being the nice person that he is, let the man inside. The man fell down to the ground, like he fainted, and my husband rushed inside the house to grab his phone. When he did so, I saw the hands of the man move. He was reaching inside his pocket and pulled out a knife. No, I gasped in horror. My husband came rushing out while dialing 911. When he got closer, the man suddenly stood up and stabbed him in the belly, then again and again and again, finishing one last stab in my husband's neck. I stopped the video and threw up. It was too much to bear. The tears came back, thinking, why would anyone do this? My husband never had enemies. Maybe some people are simply evil. I drowned myself in alcohol that night, watching the lights of the patrol car flicker by. And before going to bed, I decided to finish the video once and for all. My husband deserves that I see his last moments. As the last stab went through him, he fell down to the ground. His face wore the look of shock from what just happened. The man grabbed his wallet and ran away, leaving him bleeding to death. My husband was crawling, trying his best to reach his phone. I believed he dialed 911, informed the police that he was stabbed, and just lied there. Maybe he already realized that he was not going to make it, because in the next moment, I noticed he was staring at me. No, I realized, he was staring at the camera, and I listened closely for his last words. With blood gushing from his mouth, he tried his best to smile and said, "Hey, beautiful, it will be okay. Promise me you'll take care of yourself. Okay? I love you. Always." His head fell down, and his eyes were still glued to the camera. I watched him breathe slower and heavier until he took his last breath. I cried myself to sleep that night. After a week, the police stopped patrolling around my house. They said they couldn't get anywhere based on the footage, but they will let me know once they find any leads. I stayed with my mother for a month before deciding to come back to our house. It felt like it happened just yesterday. When I entered the gate, I could still see the stains from my husband's blood. I have to face life on my own now. As I was fumbling through my keys, I jumped when I heard someone say, "Hey, beautiful." What the fuck? I thought. Whoever is doing this prank, stop that right now. I was furious. This is not funny at all. I immediately changed our Wi-Fi's password and consulted with my IT friend if someone has hacked through the cameras. He said that everything looks secure. I didn't tell anyone this, but I know for certain that it was my husband's voice. I tried to live normally the following days and tried to forget the incident that happened early on, until one night I woke up at 2 a.m. I could hear some noise outside the house. I went out and I noticed it came from the camera. The sound was first static, followed by something gurgling. Then for a short time, I swear, I heard someone moaning in pain and said the word inside. Then the sound went silent. The hairs on my back stood up from the weird noise. I immediately went back inside, locked the doors, and checked the video feed. Nothing seems interesting. I couldn't even hear anything, even when I saw myself go outside to check. Not until I increased the brightness of my screen. There, I saw a black figure at the far back of the video. It was hidden in the shadows, but I am sure it is shaped like a human. Then it just disappeared after I closed the doors. I didn't hear any sound from the camera for the whole week. On a Friday evening, I cooked steak and paired it with red wine. It's our anniversary today. I sat on the porch and playfully raised my glass to the camera. "Cheers," I said. I can feel my eyes tearing up again, when out of nowhere it answered. Static. "I love you." Static. "Derek," I sobbed. "If you're out there, please tell me you're okay. Please." No response. I waited for an hour before calling it a night. I must have had too much to drink. I started to walk towards the door when I heard footsteps coming from outside the gate. Static. "Hide." Static. Without hesitation, I ran and closed the front door and peeked, thought the windows. Someone was moving around the house. I can hear the rustling from the footsteps. My hands were shaking as I began to dial 911. They told me to lock all doors and windows and wait for the police to arrive. I went to my room and held a baseball bat. In just a minute, I heard the window breaking. I held my breath as I heard the footsteps grew closer. They were heavy. My heart pounded every second until I could see his shadow just outside my door. I braced myself. But then I heard another man shout from across the hall, "The fuck, man? You're supposed to be dead?" That was the last thing I heard before a loud bang came from across the hallway. The police came in a few minutes and found an unconscious man inside the house. They said it was like someone threw him hard to the wall, given the crack he made on it. Suffice to say, the incident left him with a fractured spine, and he will live the rest of his life as a vegetable. I said it was self-defense, but the police only scratched their heads in disbelief. After all, I left out the part where someone else was there with me. When I heard it happen, I slowly opened my door and found that no one was there except the unconscious intruder. The next thing I heard was static coming from the camera outside. Static. "Hey, beautiful. It's okay now." Static. "Derek." "Thank you," I replied. I cried in relief and went back to my room to wait for the cops. From that day on, I always greeted our camera with, "Honey, I'm home." and I would sit by the porch to talk about my day, all the good and bad experience I had, knowing that my husband is out there, watching over me. It's been 2 years since the incident, and I never heard back from my husband since. I finally found confidence to go back into dating. I met a nice guy in a cafe, and he asked me out for dinner. While waiting to be picked up that evening, my hairs stood up from the message he sent me. Hey, beautiful, I'm here. As I sit here now beside my pond and watch the autumn fog dance along the water, and as the leaves whisper and chatter to one another, as the wind lets them, I think of my wife and how sorry I am I can't live the rest of my days here like she wanted, on our little 12-acre farm, our little quiet heaven. Or at least that's what it was supposed to be. But the land holds secrets. I know now, without a lingering question in my heart, that hell exists. I wish that gave me comfort, because that means that Diana is waiting for me at our next quiet little heaven. One that doesn't mock the search for peace, but it doesn't. Once the sun winks its red eye closed and retires for the evening, I'll be gone from this place. But there are two things I need to do first, and one of them is to write this down before I put it behind me forever. Although a part deep inside of me, the part that can't be lied to, knows that the curtain will never close on me again, matter where I go, knows that I'm forever and always awake. Cancer took her last year. She was 37. There are a million words in me I could say about losing her. The shock, the denial, the hope lost, and the twinkle in her eyes that was lost with it. The pain, those nonsense last words, the last breath. She's gone now. That's all that matters. We'd bought a 12-acre homestead in southern Illinois to escape the city. The house had been built in 1898 as a colonial revival home and was more or less falling apart. But there was a secluded, rural charm about it. It sat on a strip of land several miles off of any main road, with fields used for harvesting corn nestling the house on either side. And behind it was a fenced-in pasture that shot back into the woods, which was perfect for our 2 horses. When we did the tour, we sat on the porch and looked out at what might have been the most peaceful view we'd ever seen, with fields of wheat yawning and bowing in the wind like a sea of gold across from us. I could see in her eyes that she was in love, and so we made our minds up to make an offer right then and there. During the final walkthrough, the sellers had forgotten they'd changed the locks. They were going through what was apparently a rough divorce, and our agent had to call the estranged wife in to give us access to the home. She was amiable enough when she arrived and gave us a handful of apologies for not remembering to provide a new set of keys. But what struck me as odd, even then, was that she had seemed reluctant to step onto the property at all. She parked her car on the gravel road about 100 feet in front of the house and talked to us from there. And when she wasn't sure which key it was on her keychain to hand to us, she looked disquieted. She walked briskly to the house and fumbled with her keys and the deadbolt until she finally found the right one and opened the door without walking in, pulling her hand away from the doorknob like it was something hot to the touch. She said something about needing to get some fresh air, told the agent to bring her keys after locking up, and then hurried back to her car. I thought there may have just been bad memories of the marriage that she didn't want to revisit. or that she maybe felt awkward, or that she was intruding. It all makes sense now. We knew we had our work cut out for us from the beginning. And when we settled in, it was one thing after another: leaking toilets, bad insulation, water damage. But we were happy. Diana got sick not long after, but I'm truly grateful for that short period of time when we would work on our old farmhouse, drink coffee, and watch the sunrise from our front porch, taking in all of the life around us. After she passed, her sister took her horses as agreed, as well as our 2 dogs, temporarily. The dogs weren't my original plan, but I was taking everything pretty hard and just needed to be alone for a while. Just needed some quiet, which I didn't get anyway because of the damned wind with its constant howling and moaning through the windows. My drinking had overtaken me. There are large gaps in my memory, especially right after. I drank from the bottle like the evening's watery haze would drink me in return, hoping it would dissolve me into nothing. One morning, I'd woken up to a massive hangover that felt like it couldn't be cured by anything other than the sun and a walk. So I threw on some coveralls and went on into the woods behind the property. I'd known there was a stream or a creek of some kind that ran east through it, but the thorns and brush were so overgrown I couldn't see through more than 10 or so feet. There was a supposed path of some kind that led to the stream, and I thought if I could just push my way through enough, I'd eventually run into it. It only took me about 5 minutes until an overgrown but manageable clearing revealed itself and led me to the small stream, a steady flow of water running through it. It was only about 6 or so inches deep, but had carved its own winding path deep into the dirt over the years. I followed, thinking I'd see the tracks of various animals nearby that came to drink from it. And I did. I continued on, and in the water, I started seeing these broken fragments of bottles. They were old, very old, softened and smoothed by water and sediment and time. They were the kind of bottles you'd see on a movie set in some 19th century period piece film, with deep brown and emerald glass, with all of those gaudy, oblong angles, like some sort of snake oil elixir. There were just a few scattered fragments at first, but the further I trudged on, the more abundant the shards became, until I came to the stream's watershed, and just beyond that was an opening in the ground that looked like some sort of den, big enough to walk in if I crouched. There must have been a dozen or so broken bottles in front of it. It was like someone had dumped them in a hurry all at once, or had drunk them in unison and then smashed them. For some reason, jutting out of the sand in the water was a green bottle that seemed like it had remained intact over the years. It had 2 circular finger handles on either side of its neck and some kind of impressed label in the glass, but the letters were immersed, and I couldn't make them out. I pulled it free and rinsed it in the water, and I was just able to make out the smoothed letters stamped into the glass: arsenic, bottles of poison. But why? Why here? And how had this been here all these years without being found or picked up by hunters or one of the previous owners? I reached into my pocket to take a picture of the whole scene with my phone, but realized I had forgotten it. The hole bellowed at me, as if commanding me to gaze into its swallowing darkness, and although I couldn't see anything, I felt I was being watched from within it. A coldness crawled up my spine. I shoved the bottle into the big front pocket of my coveralls and made my way back, not being able to help but check behind me several times along the way. When I got back to the house, I poured myself a neat glass of whiskey. It was still early in the afternoon, but hunting for little treasures on the land was something Diana had loved to do. And so, the thought of coming across such a strange find made the antique arsenic bottle quite heavy in my pocket. I thought I'd lighten it with bourbon. I placed the old green bottle on my coffee table and sat across from it on my couch, and I sipped my drink. I stared at it in my quiet, empty house, quiet save for the wind. I sipped again. It was so interesting. I thought deeply on how it got there, how it hadn't been found in, well, I don't know, 130 years, maybe more. I knew arsenic had been used in tonics and pesticides before they knew how deadly it was, but it just seemed such a strange place for them to be. I thought maybe the isolation and grief had made me paranoid. I sipped my drink again. I poured another glass, and then a few more. The room went orange as the low sun came through the glass, and the wind howled through the poorly sealed windows. The old poison bottle had entranced me, and in staring at it, I'd lost track of time. Things went soft around the edges, and the whiskey numbed my tongue, glass after glass. But I remember at some point I'd imagined it had comforted me, spoken to me with silent words. Drink it, had said. Drink it in, and I did. It knew my pain and wanted it gone. I sunk into the bottle and faded with the evening. I awoke on the couch with a massive hangover, the bottle still staring, an empty one that had housed the whiskey the night before now rested beside it. I fumbled around in the medicine cabinet for some spare aspirin and forced them down with some water from the sink and went to the front porch to sit in my favorite chair and catch some crisp morning air. When I stepped outside, I noticed that the chair had been turned around toward the windows, facing right into my living room where I had slept the night before. It had been pulled close to the glass, almost like whoever was sitting in it wanted to be as close as possible to get a better view of the inside. It had to have been me, I'd thought. But why the hell would I do that? The wind had been howling and was known to blow things around, sometimes clear into the yard. But this chair was made out of cured oak and weighed 30, maybe 40 pounds. It didn't seem likely to have moved it. This heavy, floral smell clung to the wood like some sort of gaudy lavender perfume you'd find buried in some box in your grandmother's basement. Not thinking of the absurdity of it, I went back inside and sniffed the mouth of the old bottle. Nothing but the remnant smell of water. The pain from the hangover pulled the turned chair to the back of my mind. I had been in a drunken stupor and could have fumbled around out there, doing God knows what. I only managed to make it a few hours before heading to the liquor store to grab another bottle. I sat back on my couch across from the old green bottle and its drained companion from the night before, and I drank in silence, just like it wanted me to. Sometime during the night, maybe 11 or so, but it's hard to say. I was very drunk. I was browsing my phone from my couch, and 3 soft knocks tapped at my door. I didn't see any car lights come down the gravel road that ran adjacent to my house. Maybe one of the neighbors needed something, I'd thought, for reasons I can't quite comprehend. I offered a consulting glance at the bottle on the table. It told me to answer in its wordless way, and I listened. I got up and went for the door, flipping the light switch to the porch on, and remembering there had been a short in the wires. I opened it. There stood a thin young woman, faintly bathed in what little light the only lamp in the living room offered. It was hard to make out her features, but she looked like she might have been in her early to mid-20s. Her hair was long and looked like it could have been a light brown, draping halfway down her back. She wore this white, embroidered nightgown. That might have been beautiful, except even in the timid light, I could see dirt on it in several places. The shadows hid much of her face, but even then she looked pallid, her eyes bringing about this astounded look on her face as if she were confused or lost. I stood there with my drink in my hand, unsure of what to say or how to address such a strange and unexpected visitation in the middle of the night. She said that she was sorry for disturbing me, but that she was looking for her dog. She said she lived about a mile down the road and had been hearing prairie wolves the past few nights, and her dog had run off into the woods and was nowhere to be found. She said she was getting very worried. They might have tricked him into chasing after them. I told her I hadn't seen or heard of any coyotes, and then asked her about the dog. She said he was a collie, and his name was Copper. I looked down and noticed she didn't have any shoes on, and her feet were covered in mud. Did you go running through the woods in a gown without shoes on to look for him? I asked her. She glanced down and studied her muddied feet with that same surprised look and said nothing. I thought maybe she was drunk or medicated, but she looked harmless, and the whiskey had always made me well disposed. I told her to wait a moment, and I'd go get a towel so she could wipe her feet off and could come inside and warm up for a moment. Then we'd take a spotlight to go looking for him. As I reached to close the door handle and grab a towel, I noticed her eyes, so dazed and cloudy and confused before, now sprung alive in the dark with a distilled intensity, focusing in on the green arsenic bottle that sat on my coffee table. She took a single, eager step toward it, stopping just before my doorway. I held my hand out to halt her, a little startled by the approach, but still attempting to be polite. She gave a sheepish grin and shook her head. I'm deeply sorry. The cold has made me too eager for warmth this evening, she said. It was so fast, I could have easily missed it. But as she smiled, I noticed the inside of her upper lip stuck to her teeth, lagging on one side before breaking free as if her mouth had been exceptionally dry. The flesh of her lips looked harder than usual, stiffer, thin slivers of her dark gums revealing themselves. The whiskey had dulled my senses, but when she stepped in closer, I also noticed a lavender perfume smell on her and thought of the chair outside. She could have just been dehydrated for all I knew, but the whole thing just felt off, felt wrong. I closed the door and caught her glance at the bottle, with that same look again, unable to will her eyes from peering at it. I stood there for a moment, hand still on the doorknob, and then flicked the deadbolt locked with careful fingers. I thought about calling the police at that instant. It was weird, sure, but I'd ran out after our dogs half-dressed, with no shoes on before, when they chased deer or a passing car or something, so it wasn't unthinkable. But that smell, there was no mistaking it. Behind me, I could feel the bottle was displeased. Let her in. I shook my head at it, and then downed the rest of my drink. No, pardon, I could hear her say from the other side of the door. Actually, I'm very sorry, but it's late. I can call someone for you if you like. I'll keep an eye out for Copper, and we'll take him to your house if he turns up. Which house did you say it was? Down the road again? There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Oh, she said, finally, not answering my question. She sounded disappointed, not angry or insulted, just let down. I opened my mouth to apologize again, but the words never managed to crawl out of it. The lamp's dim light didn't reach far enough to illuminate the porch through the windows, but in the darkness, I thought I could see the silhouette of a head tilt its way into view from the side of the windows. The front door had been butted up against. The soft creaks of graceful bare feet on wooden steps groaned as she left the porch, and she walked into the night without saying another word. I grabbed my 9mm and made my way around the other doors to double-check the locks. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Prairie wolves, I said to myself as I poured more bourbon into my glass. Who calls them that these days? A part of me felt guilty. Maybe I'd just sent a poor girl with a missing dog back into the cold, but her mouth, that perfumed smell on her that saturated my chair the night before, how she looked at the green bottle on my table. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't think she could pose any real physical threat to me, but I felt uneasy, unalone. I took another drink from the glass. I pulled my phone out to call the police, trying my best to stay out of the line of sight of the front windows. Although I'd heard her walk off moments earlier, I couldn't help but feel naked through the glass. I got ready to dial the local station's number, but the old green bottle beckoned me over to it. I stood there with my drink in my hand, unsure of what to say or how to address such a strange and unexpected visitation in the middle of the night. She said that she was sorry for disturbing me, but that she was looking for her dog. She said she lived about a mile down the road and had been hearing prairie wolves the past few nights, and her dog had run off into the woods and was nowhere to be found. She said she was getting very worried. They might have tricked him into chasing after them. I told her I hadn't seen or heard of any coyotes, and then asked her about the dog. She said he was a collie, and his name was Copper. I looked down and noticed she didn't have any shoes on, and her feet were covered in mud. Did you go running through the woods in a gown, without shoes on, to look for him? I asked her. She glanced down and studied her muddied feet with that same surprised look and said nothing. I thought maybe she was drunk or medicated, but she looked harmless, and the whiskey had always made me well disposed. I told her to wait a moment, and I'd go get a towel so she could wipe her feet off and could come inside and warm up for a moment. Then we'd take a spotlight to go looking for him. As I reached to close the door handle and grab a towel, I noticed her eyes, so dazed and cloudy and confused before, now sprung alive in the dark with a distilled intensity, focusing in on the green arsenic bottle that sat on my coffee table. She took a single, eager step toward it, stopping just before my doorway. I held my hand out to halt her, a little startled by the approach, but still attempting to be polite. She gave a sheepish grin and shook her head. I'm deeply sorry. The cold has made me too eager for warmth this evening, she said. It was so fast, I could have easily missed it. But as she smiled, I noticed the inside of her upper lip stuck to her teeth. lagging on one side before breaking free as if her mouth had been exceptionally dry. The flesh of her lips looked harder than usual, stiffer, thin slivers of her dark gums revealing themselves. The whiskey had dulled my senses, but when she stepped in closer, I also noticed a lavender perfume smell on her and thought of the chair outside. She could have just been dehydrated for all I knew, but the whole thing just felt off, felt wrong. I closed the door and caught her glance at the bottle with that same look again, unable to will her eyes from peering at it. I stood there for a moment, hand still on the doorknob, and then flicked the deadbolt, locked with careful fingers. I thought about calling the police at that instant. It was weird, sure, but I'd ran out after our dogs, half dressed, with no shoes on, before when they chased deer or a passing car or something. So it wasn't unthinkable. But that smell, there was no mistaking it. Behind me, I could feel the bottle was displeased. Let her in. I shook my head at it, and then downed the rest of my drink. No. Pardon? I could hear her say from the other side of the door. Actually, I'm very sorry, but it's late. I can call someone for you, if you like. I'll keep an eye out for Copper, and we'll take him to your house if he turns up. Which house? Did you say it was down the road again? There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Oh, she said, finally, not answering my question. She sounded disappointed, not angry or insulted, just let down. I opened my mouth to apologize again, but the words never managed to crawl out of it. The lamp's dim light didn't reach far enough to illuminate the porch through the windows, but in the darkness, I thought I could see the silhouette of a head tilt its way into view from the side of the windows the front door had been butted up against. The soft creaks of graceful bare feet on wooden steps groaned as she left the porch, and she walked into the night without saying another word. I grabbed my 9mm and made my way around the other doors to double-check the locks. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Prairie wolves, I said to myself as I poured more bourbon into my glass. Who calls them that these days? A part of me felt guilty. Maybe I just sent a poor girl with a missing dog back into the cold. But her mouth, that perfumed smell on her that saturated my chair the night before, how she looked at the green bottle on my table. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't think she could pose any real physical threat to me, but I felt uneasy, unalone. I took another drink from the glass. I pulled my phone out to call the police, trying my best to stay out of the line of sight of the front windows. Although I'd heard her walk off moments earlier, I couldn't help but feel naked through the glass. I got ready to dial the local station's number, but the old green bottle beckoned me over to it. Drink, it had said, and I did. I thumbed my phone back into my pocket and sunk back into the couch and drank myself into an empty void. 3 empty bottles greeted me from the table in the morning, the newest member lying on its side. I was on the floor, even with the throbbing headache. I thought of the strange woman and how I managed to get drunk instead of calling the police. I looked around. The house was trashed. I hadn't cleaned it in weeks, hadn't even swept up the clumps of dog hair that accumulated in the corners of the rooms and under the furniture from months before. And now, my drinking had gotten so bad, I couldn't even manage to call the police before blacking out. Diana would have been heartbroken if she'd seen this. She hated my drinking. I let shame hit me like a puff of heavy smoke, and then I called the sheriff. As I dialed, I could still feel that green arsenic bottle pulling my gaze toward it, weighing the room down from that coffee table and anchoring everything in place, drawing me in like a dancing fire in the dark. The sheriff came by not long after, and I told her what had happened the night before, that a strange young woman was knocking on my door in the middle of the night, but hadn't actually done anything illegal that I could be sure of, but that she might have been trespassing on my property the previous night and might have been on drugs. I told the sheriff where the woman said she came from and asked her if she knew any of the homes along the road the woman had described to me. She said there was only one within a few miles on that particular stretch, but the house had been condemned 20 or so years. She said drugs had gotten pretty bad in the neighboring town, and it was possible the problem had made its way to the more rural parts of the area. She told me she would ask around in the area to see if any of the other homes experienced anything similar, and then offered to check in throughout the night. I told her it wasn't necessary, and that I had plenty of guns in the house to protect myself with, if it came to that. After the sheriff left, I uncorked my bottle and poured a glass. I just needed to take the edge off. When I looked over at the coffee table, I noticed the antique bottle was gone. Panicked, I searched the house for it for 15 or so minutes before I realized I'd put it in my coat pocket before the sheriff came by earlier, just to keep it close. A few hours later, as the sun was going down, I went around back near the gated strip that led to our pond and pasture that was butted up against the woods, where Diana's horses used to be. There had been some equipment I'd left out there for weeks, and there was supposed to be a storm coming that evening, and so I'd wanted to move everything into the barn. When I got back to the gate, I noticed it had been opened, which was something I never did, even with the horses gone. In the fading light, I made out footprints along a thin beaten path that ran through the center of the strip where the horses used to walk up to get feed. Bare footprints, from small bare feet. She had walked through the woods, through the pasture, to come knocking on my door. Thought I could make out at least 2 sets, going both toward the house and then back down the path again. But with overcast blocking the moon and stars, it was getting hard to see anything. I followed the footprints 200 or so yards until I could see them cut down into the pasture and to the gate that led into the woods. It had also been left open. I reached for the old green bottle for comfort and realized I'd left it in the house. I needed my gun. And I needed to call the sheriff. And I needed that goddamned bottle. I began making my way back to the house when I saw the woman walking past the pond and the mausoleum where Diana rested and heading toward the house. She would have been impossible to make out in the dark if it weren't for that white gown. I yelled out to her and started running before tripping over some broken wire fencing that was on the ground. She either ignored me or couldn't hear my voice through the rustling corn, which had begun to move with the wind from the oncoming storm. I was just too far away from her. She made her way to the house with this calm grace and then went around it to the front. I realized my gun had been on my table in plain sight, and I hadn't locked my door. I'd been drinking until I was numb, just like that fucking bottle had told me to. Made myself careless and stupid. There were hammers and a machete in the barn, but it was in the opposite direction, and by the time I grabbed one of them, she could easily have been inside the house for a minute, maybe more. The best thing I could find on the way was a little trench shovel in the garden. I grabbed it. When I got around to the front of the house, the door had been cracked half open. She'd gone inside. The wind blew harder and began its howling, now carrying cold pellets of rain that stung as they hit my face. My legs didn't want to approach the house, but slowly I did. That middle step to the porch, creaking the loudest it ever had, even in the wind and the rain. I pushed the door open further with the tip of the shovel. The whiskey bottles that had made themselves so comfortable next to the old green poison bottle were scattered about the floor. The green bottle gone. The gun was still sitting there, untouched. I grabbed it. I looked around for my phone, but didn't see it in sight. I could hear her walking around upstairs, in what sounded like Diana's office. I aimed my gun into the darkness toward the top of the stairs and yelled out to her, "Come out of there! I'll fucking shoot you if I have to." The creaking floorboards stopped for a moment, and then she walked out onto the landing, an obscure phantom in the dark, except for the faint lunar glow of her gown, except for the whites of her confounded eyes. She had the bottle in her hands, and she seemed to be crying. Her hands were shaking. "Don't drop it," I said lowly, eagerly. She tilted the bottle up above her head and stuck her tongue in the opening of its neck, desperate for something that hadn't been inside of it for well over a century. Her tongue made this squelching noise as she did it, as if it were much, much too dry. She gave me a distraught look and cried harder. The wind moaned through the windows, through the darkness of the house. I'd never felt more alone in my life. "Why isn't it working, Elijah?" she asked me from the top of the stairs. I didn't know what to say, nor did I have any clue who Elijah was. The woman had clearly lost her mind. I had to make sure she put the bottle down before she broke it. "Come on down. We'll just talk about it." She cradled the bottle tighter, taking slow steps down the staircase and stopping at its base. "It didn't work for me," she said, in the dark, sobbing as the words left her. I lowered my gun and reached for the lamp on the island in the kitchen, near the foot of the stairs. And for the first time, I truly saw her. She wasn't much more than an emaciated skeleton. Her skin was hardened and yellowed, and pulled tight to her. She looked not much different than Diana did on her hospice bed, just before the end. No doubt, if I would have left her in her bed a few days after she'd passed away, they would have been hard to tell apart. I should have been terrified, and a part of me was, but she looked so helpless, so pitiful, like a child holding a teddy bear. This overwhelming sensation of sadness filled me. "Why did it work for you, and not me, Elijah?" she asked me again. I set my gun on the table. I thought for a moment about whether or not to correct her on who I was, and decided it didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. I asked her what she meant. Her eyes sobered, like she realized I wasn't whoever this person was for a moment. And then she retreated. "It calls to me. But why am I still here and you're not?" I didn't respond, but I felt her words. I'd felt them in me every day since Diana had gone. "And the others?" she asked. I began crying with her. "I'm so sorry." At this, she regarded me, then winced with a tender pain and looked away. She tried drinking from the bottle again in vain. I reached out and touched her arm gently to stop her. Her skin was cold and hard. She sobered her gaze once more, and for a moment the faintest smile rose on her face, and then she retreated again for the last time into whatever life she had known when she was still alive. I guided her gently to the door, her bottle still cradled close to her, and stood in the doorway as she left. I wanted to hold onto it more than anything, but it didn't belong to me. I asked her, "Was there ever even a copper at all? Have you seen him?" She asked. I shook my head. She turned and moved around the house. I walked into the yard and to the side and watched her go on, back through the pasture and into the woods. The rain and the wind blowing her hair and gown like wild rags. She never looked back once, and then she was gone. The next few days I did a deep dive into county records, trying to find anyone who ever owned a home in the area named Elijah, but nothing turned up. It was as if she, and whoever Elijah were, never existed at all. I don't know exactly what happened to her, but I feel like she was warning me in the only way she was capable to avoid whatever hell she had found herself in. Every day I fight the urge to go back into those woods and see if that bottle is back where I found it. I catch myself walking towards the trees that lead to the stream, to that hole, and inevitably to that bottle, but I don't dare go in. She'd no doubt come looking to reclaim it, like she's likely done many times before. And if she didn't, I don't think I'll be strong enough to part with it again, which is why I'm writing this. I said that I have 2 things to do before I leave, and writing this down had to come first. So you might understand when the realtor tells you why there's an abandoned mausoleum near the pond in the back pasture. I can't let Diana stay here. I'm taking her with me and reburying her closer to our hometown, near the place we first met. Someday, I'll revisit that place in the woods and see if I can do something, anything for the woman, but I'm not strong enough to face it. Not yet. Even now, I can feel the pull of that bottle out in the stream, begging me to come back and take it. And even as I write this, I can feel I'm being watched from the tree line, and I get this feeling that it isn't her this time. It was supposed to be another boring Tuesday. It wasn't late enough in the week to start looking forward to the weekend, but late enough to already feel like I was done with the week. My head felt like it was going to explode from the mind-numbing monotony of work I'd been staring at, the same column of numbers on my computer for what felt like hours, my mind wandering in desperate search of something, anything, to break up my day. I really have to find another job, I reminded myself strictly. I had been telling myself that for years though, but had never managed to make the move. I told myself it was just me being lazy, but deep down, I think I was scared of change, of moving into the unknown. As much as I hated my job, maybe my next one would be worse. I leaned over to my coworker, Alice, and whispered, "Hey, Al, what did you got for me?" Alice and I had an agreement that when each of us got super bored, we'd share an interesting bit of news or office gossip. The most recent offerings had been things like the red panda born at the zoo was named Ralph. Strange lights were seen flying over Cincinnati, Lima, Vancouver, Cape Town, and Ouagadougou. And Phoebe, from Human Resources, won $11 on a scratch ticket, bought another ticket with those winnings, and then won $5,000, so is taking her new boyfriend on a trip to New Zealand. As you can see, really anything to prod the mind into staying alive. We were able to chuck back names we thought would have been better than Ralph. Alice liked Buster or Boots, while I preferred Bartholomew and Atticus, and we shared our jealousy for Phoebe's lottery win and griped over never being able to travel anywhere interesting. Alice leaned in close. I've got something good. A serial killer just escaped from a high-security prison, she whispered. No one knows where he is, but people think he's nearby. My heart stilled for a moment. Then I laughed it off. That's not true, is it? Alice nodded. It's all over the news. Name's Sable Graves. Sable Graves? No. You're for sure making that up, I said. When have I ever made up one of my stories, Clara? Prodded Alice. I rolled my eyes. Tons of times, I said. Okay, fair enough, she said. Sometimes I don't have real interesting stories to share, but this one is true. I swear. And interesting, right? Look it up. I turned back to my computer and opened a browser. I typed in SABL, but then I stopped because I noticed things on my desk were vibrating, shaking, clattering. I gripped my mug of coffee tightly to stop it sloshing all over my keyboard. Earthquake, someone yelled out. Memories from primary school earthquake drills pounced on me, forcing me to dive without thinking under my desk. Is this what we're supposed to do? I wondered, simultaneously remembering something else about standing in door frames. The office continued shaking, but not in a rocking, violent way. It was more a deep vibration. I held my breath, waiting to see if the tremors would build. And I prayed. I wouldn't say I'm a religious person, but in crisis, I do find myself reaching out. I've always had the sense that there is something greater out there, and I figured it never hurt to ask, right? So I prayed, please, don't let it be a bad earthquake. The tremors continued steadily, almost too steady, I found myself thinking. Then a strange humming began, deep and unnatural. But then suddenly, it switched to a horrible high pitch. I covered my ears with my hands and screamed. Maybe I thought my voice could somehow muffle the sound, or maybe I just plain terrified. Without warning, a blinding white light blasted through the windows, engulfing everything in its glow. That's the last thing I remember. I woke up, face flat on the floor. I pushed myself up, trying to shake haziness from my eyes. I slowly pulled myself to standing, finding my body was aching, as if I'd been thrown into a wall. I peered around, trying to see if everyone else was okay. It was then I realized I wasn't in the office anymore. I was in a house, what looked like living room, one I didn't recognize at all. My heart pounded heavily in my chest. The thumping felt deafening in the still silence of the room. I stumbled over to the door. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't move. I was locked in. I had the sense that something was dreadfully wrong before this. But now I knew for sure. You have to get out of here. My brain screamed at me. Find a way out. Find a way out. I scanned the room. There were no other doors. Just that, one. But a large window stretched across one of the walls. I rushed over to see if I could get out that way. The window was covered by a heavy-looking curtain. I tried to swipe it aside, but it wouldn't move. My brain still wasn't working well yet. It took me a couple of seconds to realize that the curtain wasn't inside the room. It was on the outside of the window. Why is there a curtain on the outside? I wondered. It made no sense. But nothing really made sense to me at this point. I felt around the window for a latch, an opening, anything, but there was no way to open the window, find a way out. My brain shouted at me again. I looked around the room for something I could use to break the window. There wasn't much in it. A simple couch, a bed in the corner, a table with a few mismatched chairs around it, a desk with a computer, and papers scattered about. I picked up one of the chairs and hurled it at the window. It bounced back, not even making a crack. I tried again. Wham! But nothing again. I felt the glass again. I realized it didn't really feel like glass, more like a sort of plastic, but it was slippery, almost like it was coated in something. I pounded on it. It felt thick, unmoving. My heart plummeted into my stomach with dread. I knew there was no way I was going to be able to break it. I knew I was trapped. A tidal wave of fear crashed over me. Tears poured down my face. I let myself cry, wail, for about 3 minutes. But then I told myself, no, stop, pull yourself together. You're never going to get out of here if you fall to pieces. Stay sharp. Stay smart. I wiped the tears from my face and took several huge breaths to calm myself. Then I switched into my logical brain. Look around, I told myself. Maybe something here will tell you where you are. I scanned the room again, trying to take in details of the room this time. I realized there weren't a lot of details. Something about this felt really off. The room didn't feel lived in. It felt too simple, sanitized. I went to touch the couch. I found it wasn't soft. It was made of something solid, hard, like a sort of plaster, molded into what looked like a couch. I went to the computer desk. Getting close, I realized the computer also wasn't a normal computer. It too seemed to be crafted of this plaster substance. The papers scattered around had strange symbols on it, and picking them up, I realized they weren't paper, but some sort of extremely thin metal. Nothing I was taking in could I make any sense of. Hello? I called out. No one answered. Hello? I shouted as loudly as I could. Is anyone there? I waited, listening. Silence. But then I heard something. A dull scraping sound. My head whipped around to look to where it was coming from. A small panel in the wall was sliding aside, revealing a small opening. I ran over to it. Hello? I shouted. Who are you? A tray with a sandwich on it came through the opening. Then the panel swiftly slid closed. Wait! I shouted. Please, who are you? What's going on? Hello? I want out of here. No amount of shouting or pleading made a difference. No one answered me. I tried to pry the panel back open, but it was impossible. I looked down at the sandwich on the tray, and I realized it wasn't actually a sandwich. I poked it. It was some sort of gelatinous substance, shaped and vaguely colored as a sandwich. Was it even edible? Maybe it was poisonous. There was no way for me to know. I pushed the tray away. I suddenly noticed the curtain on the window was moving. It was opening. I ran over to it to watch as the curtain was drawn back. I don't know what I expected to see on the other side, but it definitely wasn't what I saw. I saw a long, dimly lit hallway stretching from left to right. It was gleamingly clean. The hallway was lined with other curtains, all which were moving aside to reveal windows, like mine. The window directly across from mine was the only one I could get a good look inside of. It was filled with vines, twisting and reaching toward the ceiling. Puffs of blue mist ejected from tubes into the room every few seconds. I saw a couple of small creatures scurry along the vines. They looked a bit like monkeys, but instead of being covered in fur, they had shiny blue scales on them. One of them stopped and looked directly at me. It blinked its little eyes at me, then pulled something from a pouch in its belly, a perfectly round little pearl. It held it up to me, as if showing it off. Then it pushed it back into its belly pouch and darted off to its companion. I was only just starting to try to comprehend what was in front of my eyes when a door at the end of the hallway caught my eye. It was opening. Then something emerged. Spindly legs reached into the hall, bringing a multi-eyed creature closer and closer to me. A gigantic spider. I was paralyzed, my body firmly disobeying my mind's forceful instructions to run and hide. The spider came closer, its eyes trained on my window. For some reason, I guess my body figured if I could just remain still, it wouldn't see me. Stupid. The spider came up to the window. I felt its eyes taking me in, scanning my entire body meticulously. Its gaze was so intense I felt it could see parts of me I didn't even realize were there. A wrinkle at the corner of my eye, a scar on my hand, picked up in childhood, long since forgotten. Maybe it could even see right into me, see the blood pulsing through my veins, see my lungs screaming for air as I held my breath. Frozen in fear, I had no choice but to look straight at it. My first impression had been that it was a gigantic spider, but I realized it wasn't quite a spider. Its legs didn't look organic. They had more of a metallic look to them than the hairy body that sat on top. The creature had numerous amber-colored eyes circling its head like a beady crown. Its mouth held sharp fangs, framed by what looked sort of mandibles. One of the mandibles stretched out to my window, almost like a protractable arm with delicate finger-like tentacles at the end. The tentacles caressed the window. I remained frozen, unable to move. I could feel beads of sweat begin to line my brow. Eventually, the creature slid its tentacles off the window and disappeared down the hall. That's when I lost all use of my limbs. I collapsed to the floor, shaking mercilessly. Questions swirled in my brain. What was that thing? Where in the world am I? Why am I here? Is that thing going to hurt me? Is it going to eat me? I hurled everything that was in my stomach onto the floor. A pool of liquid. Acid was left splayed out in front of me. Then I heard a loud knock on the wall at the back of the room. The lights pulsed in my enclosure. Then a large panel slid open, and two spider creatures came through. They were coming right for me. I screamed, grabbing a chair, readying myself for a fight to the death. I swung the chair in front of me and shouted, "Get away from me, or I'll kill you. I will, I swear, I will." But they kept coming. It was just seconds before I felt the sting in my side. The creature's spindly leg had moved so swiftly, I had barely saw it coming. But a point on its end had stabbed me in the side. My body was immediately overtaken by a flood of warmth. I'm going to die now, I told myself. This is how it ends. A haziness overtook me. I realized I felt at peace. I'm okay with dying, I thought, as long as I stay this comfortable. The chair dropped from my hands. I sank softly to the floor, onto my knees, and I watched as the spiders cleaned up my vomit from the floor. Then they departed. The opening in the wall slid closed, and I was alone again. Maybe I've been dreaming this whole time, I thought, as my brain floated in haziness. When I wake up, I'll be back home, in my own bed, hugging my teddy bear. But then I felt my mind begin to grow sharp again. I felt myself regain control of my body. I clutched my hands to my head. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I realized I had probably just been drugged when I was stabbed by that spider. Then other questions began to tumble through my mind. Are those spider things real? Maybe this is a movie set or something. Is this some kind of weird experiment? Am I being filmed? Maybe this is some sort of twisted reality show? I pulled myself up, driven by this new mission of mine. Find the hidden cameras. There must be a camera, I told myself. This must be a show. Again, stupid. But that honestly made more sense to me than anything else I could comprehend at the time. I reasoned that lifelike robots, designed for some ethically questionable reality show, seemed far more plausible than actual living monsters keeping me captive. I searched the entire room, but I couldn't find any cameras, just plain walls. This infuriated me. If I had found a camera, at least things would begin to make sense. But nothing made sense. I found my fear transferring into red-hot rage. I beat the walls with my fists and screamed. Then I heard a click, click, click. I looked back to the window and nearly jumped out of my skin. Many more of those spider things had arrived at my window. They gathered around, peering at me. One extremely large one was tapping on my window. Click, click, click. Then I saw a swarm of tiny spiders scuttle up on top of that large one. Their beady little eyes all stared at me with something that almost looked like curiosity. Were these children? I wondered. The scene looked almost familiar in a strange way, like families looking at Ralph, the red panda. The realization hit me at once like a gut punch, and my memory flashed to what Alice had told me about strange lights seen over cities. I thought about the unnatural vibrations, the humming, the intense flood of light, and I realized all this time I had been wondering, where in the world am I? When I should have been wondering, where in the universe am I? My enclosure, everything, it all made sense now. I was in a zoo, an alien zoo. I had no idea what to do with this information. Emotions like fear and despair and helplessness and anger all swirled together inside me, eventually hardening into a solid rock of spite. I leapt behind the couch and hid. I didn't want any of them to have the satisfaction of looking at me. I curled up into a ball, away from the curious beady eyes. Eventually, I fell asleep. I awoke to a knock on the wall. It was the same sound I had heard before my alien captors had entered to clean up my vomit, and the lights pulsed just like they did the time before. I scrambled to the edge of the room, staying far away from the wall I knew was about to open. I didn't want to get stung again. I watched the back wall slide open. Sure enough, 2 aliens came through into my enclosure. This time, I tried harder to see what was beyond them, where they were coming from, if there was any route for escape. But it looked like they were emerging from a large plain box. I wondered if maybe they had to step into another enclosure before entering mine to prevent the escape I had been hoping for. But then I realized, if I'm in space or on some alien planet, Where am I escaping to? Even if I was able to get out of this enclosure, I wouldn't be able to just flee home, would I? I thought of the puffs of blue mist in the enclosure across from mine, and wondered if maybe my air was specially treated for me too. Would the air outside even be breathable for me? I wondered. I saw that the aliens were pulling something with them, a platform that hovered just over the floor. On it was something which I couldn't quite see as their bodies were obstructing my view. They carefully rolled whatever it was off the platform, then left. That's when I finally saw what it was. A human. My heart leapt, knowing I wasn't alone. Getting closer, I saw it was a man, but he wasn't moving. His eyes were closed. "Hello?" I said. He didn't respond. I kneeled by his side and saw that he was breathing. I remembered myself waking up earlier, disoriented, in that very same place. He must be drugged, I thought. I looked at him more carefully. He looked to be about my age, mid-20s, dark hair, with a clean-cut look and a strong, tall build. I'd probably think he was attractive if I was attracted to guys. I shook his shoulder. It took a couple minutes, but finally, I saw his eyes flutter. "Hello," I shouted. "Are you okay?" The man opened his eyes. They were a mix of blue-green-gray, like a stormy ocean. "Where am I?" he asked groggily. I wasn't sure how to respond, having only just come up with an answer to that question myself, and I found myself too scared to say it out loud. I knew it would sound crazy, and I didn't want to rattle the poor fellow. Not right away, anyhow. Let him settle a bit first, I told myself. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Clara." I told him. "Clara. Hi. It's really nice to meet you." He looked up at me and smiled, his eyes twinkling with charisma. I wondered if he was still under the haziness of the drug. He didn't seem as freaked out as I had expected him to be. "What do you remember?" I asked him. "I mean, do you remember what happened before you woke up?" His smile dropped. I could see him racking his brain for memories. "Where am I?" he asked again, as he slowly pulled himself up, taking in the room around him. Then he swore mightily. "This is a prison, isn't it?" he yelled. He stumbled to his feet and circled the room, feeling all the walls. Do you remember a light?" I asked. "A light?" the man said, confused, as he continued his scan of the enclosure. The window curtain was now closed, so he couldn't see into the hall beyond. The man seemed to be feeling the walls for weaknesses. He hit a button I hadn't even realized was there. A wide-rimmed bucket popped out of the wall. "The lives we lived before," he said. "They don't matter. Here. This is all that matters now. Our entire world now exists within these walls." "What are you trying to say?" I asked, point blank. "That I think you'll learn to like me," he said, with a confidence that made my skin crawl. I watched him look back to the window. "Oh, come. You gotta see this," he said. "The egg. It's hatching." I saw the spiders retreat from our window, so decided to go take a look. I went and saw the spiders were now watching the little money creatures. The two were both holding the little pearl, which was splitting into pieces. It was an egg, because inside was a little baby monkey. The spiders clicked their legs on the glass of the enclosure. The parent monkeys held up their child proudly. "I bet they want us to have kids too," Patrick said, looking at me with a grin. "That won't be happening," I told him. "I think you should choose a new name," he said. Why would I do that? I asked. I think you'll have an easier time adapting to our new reality if you leave your old life behind, he explained. Then I remembered his hesitation when I had asked what his name was. Is your name really Patrick? I asked. Yes, he said with a smile. It is now. What was your name before, though? I asked. I told you. Before doesn't matter, he said. It matters to me, I said. He just smiled at me, then walked away. I watched as he picked up things around the room, examining them. He rifled through the papers at the desk. He picked one up and felt the edge of it. He pressed his finger along the corner, slicing his skin open. Sharp, he said, sucking the blood away with his mouth. He then started to fold the sheet. I always liked the name Rosemary, he said. I think that's what I'll call you. My name is Clara, I said. Now it's Rosemary, he said. How would you like it if I just picked a name for you? I asked. Like, now your name is... For some reason, my mind blanked for all male names, but one name jumped to mind. Sable, I said. Hearing that name, he turned quickly to me, his eyes flashing with what looked like rage. I knew immediately I had made a huge mistake. You will call me Patrick, he said in a calm but ice-cold tone. My heart was thumping painfully in my chest. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was going to pass out. I knew why the name Sable had jumped to my mind. It's the name I had been typing into my computer when the office had started shaking. Sable Graves. I hadn't had time to see what he looked like. Why don't you like the name Sable? I asked quietly, afraid to know the answer. I think you know why, he said. Don't you, Rosemary? I looked to the sheet that Patrick, or Sable Graves, was folding, and now saw that it now was in the shape of a knife. Maybe Sable is a name from your past that you'd like to leave behind, I whispered. He nodded, his expression remaining stony. Okay, I said. I understand, Patrick. He smiled at me, but the twinkle didn't reach his eyes this time. He pushed his newly made knife into his pocket. I watched him closely as he wandered back to the window. He gazed out of it, watching the little monkeys in the enclosure across from us. They're a cute little family, aren't they? He said. I nodded. Rosemary, my darling, he asked. Can I ask you a question? Sure, I said. What do you think would happen if one of us died? He asked. Do you think they would go back to Earth? Pick us up a new partner? I felt like the wind had been knocked from me. He turned to me, patiently waiting to hear my response. I don't know, was all I was able to squeak out. I think they would, he said. Not that I think either of us will die, he added with a laugh. Not if we live harmoniously together, like that little family over there. I'm tired. Let's go to bed, my darling. I'll sleep on the couch, I said. Rosemary, my darling, he said softly. I think you'll be more comfortable in the bed. The couch is fine, I said firmly. His eyes turned cold again. Come to bed, Rosemary, he said. I'm not tired yet, I told him. He started walking towards me. The look on his face terrified me. I grabbed a chair and held it in front of me. Stay away from me, I shouted. But he pulled out the knife from his pocket. If you don't want to be a family, that's fine, he said. They'll find me someone who will. I don't remember much from after this. I know he tried to stab me, And I know I got the knife from him, and there was blood, a lot of blood. Then there were spiders coming at us. Then the sting. I woke up, my face flat on the floor. It took me a minute to realize that it wasn't the cold, hard ground of the enclosure. It was grass, and I could feel the warmth of the sun shining down on me. I pulled myself up. I found I was in the middle of a field. I started walking. I walked and walked, having no idea where I was. Eventually, I came to a farmhouse. There was a woman there with her kids. She helped me. She told me I was in Missouri. I'd never been to Missouri in my life. The woman phoned 911. I chose not to tell anyone the true story. I didn't think I would be believed. But I think people deserve to know the truth about what's out there. When Jenny spoke, it took her. We were camping, 4 of us, out in the Wintercrest woods. I know, it was stupid. Everyone said it was a bad idea to come out here if it wasn't the dead of summer. We thought they were just talking about the terrain, snow, landslides, the cold, typical camping worries. And we've been doing this for long enough that wasn't a worry. So we went. Jenny, Rob, Margot, Hunter, and me. Terry, Theodore, really. But only my mom calls me that. Called me that. I don't think I'm going to hear my full name again. Doesn't matter. I'm getting ahead of myself. This won't make sense if I don't start at the campsite. It could be worse. That was Rob. An attempt at being optimistic. A sad one. But I appreciated it. Honestly, the grounds weren't great. There were too many stones and a littering of crunchy leaves everywhere. Jenny dragged her foot over the ground, eyeing it uncertainly. I think we're going to have a couple of long nights out here. I can already feel my back hurting. It's going to be fine. I dropped my backpack onto the ground and gave them a smile. We've been talking about coming out here for years. Let's just try and get some extra padding under us and, we can probably clear some of it away. Hunter snorted. I'm not hauling rocks. He crossed his arms over his chest, expression dour. And I didn't bring extra padding. You have built-in extra padding. Rod gave Hunter a pat on the hip. You'll be fine. Margot helped me clear away some of the larger rocks. We doubled up our bags where we could and settled in for the night. It woke me. The silence woke me. You know how sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and the power has gone out, and it's such an intense darkness. You know, that's what woke you. It was the same thing, but with the silence. Utter, intense quiet. Fear churned in my chest. Every muscle felt tense. I was aware of the harsh rasp of each exhale. I could almost hear the rise and fall of my chest. It was terrifying. The thought of moving entered my mind, but I was petrified of being the thing that broke the silence. I don't know how long I laid there. It felt like an eternity. All of a sudden, the forest just crashed back to life. Exhaling hard, I scrambled out of my tent on my hands and knees, ignoring the way the stones dug into my palms. Margot, Rob, and Hunter came bursting out of their tents. Jenny was nowhere to be seen. Jesus Christ! Hunter ran his fingers through his wild, tangled hair. What the fuck was that? Where's Jenny? Rob grabbed Margot by the shoulder. She shook him off. I don't know. She said she was going to pee. You didn't go with her? She's 30, Rob. She can pee in the bushes on her own. Rob took off into the darkness without another word. That's when I realized I was freezing. My jacket was soaked with sweat. I curled my arms around myself and announced, "I'm going to change. I'll be right back." I had barely gotten on my new sweater when Rob started screaming. "I'm not going to bore you with the details," he screamed. We ran and found him. He had found Jenny. She was dead. Her throat was split open. Deep claw marks had split the flesh of her cheeks. The snow around her was stained red. We cried. Margot puked. We reconvened at the camp. It was dark. We couldn't leave. And then it went silent again. It was like something had just suctioned all of the sound from around us. I froze, eyes going wide. They met Margot's. She mouthed, "Behind you," but I couldn't bring myself to turn and look. My muscles ached. Rob was behind me. Hunter, too. I tried to hear something other than my own heart beating, but it was drowned out by my thundering inhales. Margot turned white. Tears formed in her eyes. I prayed she didn't cry. I knew I would be able to hear the tear hit the ground, and it would sound like a bomb dropping. It was just that quiet. When the sound crashed back into being, it brought a splitting migraine. Intense pain shot through my skull, and I dropped to the ground, shouting and grabbing my head. Margot collapsed across from me, forehead pressing to the stony forest floor as she sobbed, "Terry." She managed to get out. After the ultimate silence, her voice sounded like cymbals going off right next to my head. Margot fell silent, opting to just point a trembling hand, blinking the tears. From my eyes, I managed to get back up to my knees. Behind me, Hunter and Rob were splayed out on the ground. Red snow, thick open wounds in their necks where they had been split open. Hunter's bottom jaw was dislocated, flesh purpling. His tongue was gone. God, his tongue was gone, ripped straight out of his mouth. "We have to go." Even the whisper made my headache spike. I grabbed Margot by the hands and hauled her up. The dried leaves beneath our boots crunched. A chip bag getting crumpled in my ear over and over. The stones our boots knocked into skittered with the same crash as a wrecking ball. We only made it 10 foot before the sound was sucked out of existence again. I froze. Margot took an extra 2 stops before she caught herself and went still. But those 2 steps, they were too much. The sound split the silence open like a knife. She turned to look at me. All I could do was stand there and watch as a thin, red line spread down the length of her throat. And then it exploded open, the air filled with a fine, red mist. Margot fell backward, hitting the ground. But there was no sound. It was gone. Invisible claws silently ripped into her face, splitting her cheeks and her gums. And then the sound came back, but I couldn't move. "I won't be able to make it to the morning. I'm cold. It's snowing. If the sound goes away again, the chattering of my teeth is going to give me away." So instead of running, I wrote this. I don't know what's eating the sound, but I do know if you come out to these woods in the winter, it's going to hear you. It's going to hear you, but you're never going to hear it. I had been killed over and over again for the past 4 days. I couldn't tell whether this nightmare had only started happening 4 days ago, or if it had been going on for much longer, and I just noticed it recently. 4 days ago, I lived my life as usual. Nothing strange had happened until I passed by a blonde, white man wearing a jumper. The man didn't seem unusual, and I didn't remember ever meeting him. However, as he walked past me, he suddenly pulled a gun from his jacket, pointed it at my face, and pulled the trigger. It happened so fast that I barely remember anything about it. I woke up the next morning with that memory vivid in my mind. It was just a nightmare, I told myself. But I was wrong. It wasn't. Later that day, as I went out to buy groceries, I passed a bald white man wearing a t-shirt and jeans. I'd never met him before. He looked nothing like the man in my dream. But they shared one thing in common. They both killed me. As he walked past me, he pulled a hammer from under his shirt and swung it toward the back of my head. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my room. No wounds, no blood, just the memory of two different men killing me in two different ways on two consecutive days. At first, I thought it was just a strange dream within a dream, but I was wrong. It wasn't. On the third day, as I was about to get into my car, a young man appeared out of nowhere. He pulled a knife from under his clothes and stabbed me in the chest. I had been killed 3 times, in 3 different ways, on 3 consecutive days. Something strange was happening. On the 4th day, I decided to take control. I sneaked out of my house, careful and watchful. I was searching for any of the 3 men who had killed me. Lucky for me, I found one, the man with the hammer. I hid in an alley and waited for him to pass before grabbing him and dragging him into the shadows. I managed to knock him unconscious and tie him to a chair. When he woke up, it took hours of interrogation before he finally spoke. "If I were you, I wouldn't want to know," he said. He sighed, then continued his explanation, an explanation I never expected to hear and could barely believe. According to him, the town I lived in was an artificial town, created in an underground facility called Crime Zone. The facility served one purpose: to provide a space where any crime could be committed legally. The facility had many levels, each dedicated to a specific crime. The first floor was for robbery, the second for assault, the third for rape, the fourth for murder, and so on. The deeper the level, the more horrifying the crimes. The reason for this facility? Human nature. No matter how good life seems, there's always a dark corner in the human mind. People commit crimes out of anger, lust, or worse. The facility was created to let people indulge their monstrous urges in a controlled environment, ensuring the outside world remained safe and free from crime. Outside the facility, any crime, even the smallest, was punishable by death. "Okay, say you're telling the truth," I shouted. "What about me? What about us, the people who live here? Are we just here to satisfy the twisted desires of others?" "That's the thing," he said. "You're not supposed to remember any of this." He paused. "This town is the 4th floor, the murder zone. You live your life day by day, remembering everything except the murders that happened to you. But somehow you remember," he added. "It seems like there's an error happening in your system." "An error? I'm not a machine," I yelled. The man chuckled. "Maybe not, but in a way, you are. You're an artificial human." "Artificial human? That's ridiculous. I bleed just like anyone else." "No, not androids. Artificial humans," he clarified. "Like clones, but not exactly. You're not real." Stop wasting your time. Let the agents fix you, and everything will go back to normal. Before I could respond, I felt a sudden electric shock from behind. I fell forward, unable to move. My vision blurred, and sounds became distant, but I could still hear bits of the conversation. What took you so long? I paid for this. The man shouted at two officers in military uniforms who had appeared to untie him. We apologize, one of them said. It looks like we need to run diagnostics on all artificial residents. It's sad, the first officer said, looking at me. His only purpose is to be killed, over and over, every single day. Yeah, and now, with this kind of error happening to him, the second officer added, there's a risk he'll be recycled. Samantha? I heard Rosalind ask hopefully as she picked up the phone. I was calling her because she had recently come across an anomalous VHS tape of a man burying a premonition he had written down in my cemetery, convinced that it would one day be of great value to me. She had showed it to me, and I had of course agreed to see if I could find it. Hi, Rose. Yeah, it's me, I replied, unable to hide my disappointment. I dug around in the area where the guy buried his time capsule, and I couldn't find anything. Whoever picked up and turned off the camera at the end of the video must have taken the time capsule too. Yeah, I figured that, but it was worth a shot. Thanks for checking anyway, Rosalind said consolingly. The video looked like it was taken during the late autumn, and if the will-o'-the-wisps were there, that means it had to have been on Halloween, right? Yep, and the only reason anyone would be in my cemetery on Halloween would be a descendant of Artaxerxes' crow, looking to honor their pact with Persephone, I replied. If we assume the video was taken during the 90s, the most likely candidate would be Erasmus Crow, Elam's grandfather. Elam doesn't know anything about any prophecy that was recovered the night Erasmus sacrificed himself. But he does remember that his father Ephraim went to the cemetery after midnight that Halloween, so it's completely possible that Erasmus left a message for him about the time capsule before the wisps got him. For all we know, Ephraim destroyed whatever was in the time capsule as soon as he dug it up. But if he did keep it, Seneca would have it now. You're sure? She asked. Mm-hmm. Since Elam had been cut out of his father's will, Seneca was able to use his position as his business partner to claim most of his assets, I explained. If Seneca had read the premonition that had been meant for me, that might explain why he was so keen to get me into the Ophian occult order. Artaxerxes wrote in his journal that he thought one of his descendants would enact some vaguely defined iconoclasm when the stars aligned. Elam's convinced that would have been his daughter if she had survived, and that I've effectively taken up her mantle in assuming responsibility for the cemetery. If Seneca does have the time capsule, Emrys or even Ivy can just order him to hand it over, right? Can you see if she'll do that? Oh, well, actually, Rosalind stammered awkwardly. She's listening right now, isn't she? I asked flatly. Sorry, Samantha. She apologized sheepishly. That's all right. I understand. I sighed. Ah, Miss Noir. I'm assuming you saw the video too, and authorized Rose to show it to me. I think you'll agree that it's imperative that I know what was in that time capsule. I'm not even asking for it back. I just want to look at it. Is that something that can be arranged? The line was completely silent for a long moment, long enough that I wondered if the call had been anticlimactically dropped mid-conversation. "I'll arrange it," a posh British accent finally replied in an assertive tone. "I'll send Ms. Romero around to your place of employment tomorrow afternoon to pick you up. You may bring your girlfriend and your familiar along if you wish." Before I could object or even ask any follow-up questions, there was a sharp click and the line went dead. Rosalind hadn't even had a chance to knock on the front door of Eve's Eden of Esoterica before Genevieve pulled it open and positioned herself protectively between her and me, folding her arms and glaring down at her with an intimidating gaze. "Oh, hi, Eve," Rose said, adopting a contrite stance as she clutched her hands in front of her. "Where are you taking us?" Genevieve demanded. "Evie, sweetie, relax. We have a pact with Emrys, and the Ooh reports to him now. They couldn't hurt us if they wanted to," I reminded her gently, placing my hand on her shoulder and trying to pull her back a bit. That didn't stop Seneca from inviting us to a play where he summoned yet another banished god into our realm, she countered, before sharply turning back to face Rosalind. "Answer the question. The Crow's old estate. A short drive outside of town," she responded. "Seneca says Artaxerxes left an old spellwork vault behind, one he's made no progress in opening. He can't make any promises, but if what you're looking for is anywhere, it's in there." Genevieve and I both immediately looked behind me and to our right, where my spirit familiar had manifested at the mention of his old home. "Elam's here, I take it?" Rose asked, as she peered fruitlessly in the direction we were looking. "He is. If he says anything he wants you to know, I'll tell you," I replied. "I know what she's talking about, and I can't open it. My father never gave me the combination," Elam said. "He says he doesn't know how to open the vault," I repeated. "Seneca says that the mere presence of a crow, living or dead, should be enough to let him crack the vault open. It's sort of a two-factor authorization thing," Rosalind explained. "So, Seneca will be there then?" Genevieve asked in disdain. "He will, yes. The deal is that if you help him get it open, you can claim the documents that were specifically addressed to you, but everything else is still part of the Crow estate and legally his," Rosalind said. Genevieve groaned at the horrible offer, and I turned to give Elam a sympathetic glance. "Are you okay with that?" I asked, helping Chamberlain claim the last final scraps of what was rightfully mine. "Sure, why not?" He sighed as he hung his head and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Someone gave their life to try to get that message to you. We need to see it." "Elam's on board," I told Rosalind. "So you'll do it?" she asked hopefully. "We'll do it." Lottie promised. She'd watch the shop for us and fill in for me at yoga. Genevieve relented. "Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you," Rose said with relief. "You two don't know how important this is. Ivy doesn't think it was random luck that I picked that tape from Orville's box. I had another encounter with the effulgent one back in May, and if I understood him correctly, he thinks the conflict between Emrys and the Darlings is spiraling into some kind of clash of the titans. Ivy thinks my connection to him has given me a subconscious insight into this, and whatever was in that time capsule could be vital, so long as what we're doing helps keep the peace. We're willing to help. I nodded. Awesome, thank you. I parked just down the street a little bit, she said, as she gestured in the vague direction of her electric crossover. Did you want to sit in the front with me? Or in the back with your girlfriend? Ex-girlfriend. Genevieve corrected her in a matter-of-fact tone. Wait, what? She asked, looking at me wide-eyed with a mix of shock and pity. I didn't have the heart to torment her like that. So with an awkward smile, I simply held up my left hand, showing her the rose gold ring with wrought maple leaves encircling a morganite centerpiece on my ring finger. Oh my God, don't do that, she shouted with relief as she threw her arms around me. Congratulations. When did you two get married? Last Midsummer's Eve. We were hand-fasted in a small civil ceremony. We basically eloped, I explained. Neither of us proposed, at least not formally. If you were wondering, we just decided that after 5 years together, we were both pretty confident that our relationship was permanent and that it would be best to make it official. But why didn't you have a real wedding, though? I love weddings, she asked. Samantha wouldn't have been comfortable being the center of attention like that. And traditional weddings are really just a form of conspicuous consumption, which I'm not comfortable with, Genevieve replied, holding up a ring of white gold with beech leaves around a green beryl gemstone. The spring to my autumn. And I've read that having big, overhyped wedding ceremonies isn't great for relationships either. It's important to manage expectations, and a big wedding can feel more like the end of a relationship than the beginning. You've just got to make everything political, don't you? Rosalind groaned. So who was there? Lottie, Genevieve's half-brother, and his girlfriend, my sister and her family, and my dad, I explained. I did invite my mom on the condition that she be respectful, and she chose not to attend, which was considerate of her. She's not hateful or anything, but she's never been shy about the fact that she wishes I had turned out more like my sister, and she and Genevieve in particular don't get along. It's to be his or no one's, ma'am. He's not one to part with a treasure once it's fallen into his hands, Woodbead said. Then why didn't he ever ask for our help before? I asked. He's known about Elam for years. If you had accepted my offer to join the Ophian occult order, rest assured, breaking into this blasted vault would have been amongst the first things I would have ordered you to do. I heard Seneca shout from the next room, obviously within earshot. After that, there were simply more important things going on, and you've never really been inclined to help me unless you believed it also served some kind of common good. If you were simply more amicable to cash incentives, we could have gotten this chore done with ages ago. We passed into the next room and saw Seneca bent over in front of a tall iron door with the enlarged face of an aged and wizened man rising out of it, a face that Genevieve and I immediately recognized. That's Artaxerxes' crow, I remarked as I cautiously approached it. I tentatively stretched my hand out towards it, the air becoming rapidly more chill the closer I got. I chose to snap my hand back rather than touch it, and then noticed a plaque mounted above the frame. Gold is for the mistress, silver for the maid, copper for the craftsman, cunning at his trade. I read aloud. Good, said the Baron, sitting in his hall. But iron, cold iron, is master of them all. It's a Kipling poem. written about a century after Xerxes made this thing. But I guess Eratosthenes thought it was fitting, Seneca commented. The vault is made from cold iron? I asked. Exceptionally pure and alchemically enhanced. Cold iron, Seneca expounded, repels ghosts, witches, fae, and is strong enough that I can't just blast it open without risking serious damage to whatever's inside. What's cold iron? Rosalind asked. It's kind of a broad term for any iron alloy that's had its innate anti-thaumaturgical properties enhanced, I replied. Basically, it draws astral and psionic energy out of you like ordinary metal conducts heat. That's what makes it cold. The more of those you have, the stronger the effect. Wait, the whole vault is made out of cold iron? Not just the door? Genevieve asked. Then even if we open it, Samantha and I won't be able to go in. Neither will Elam. You say that like it's a bug and not a feature. Seneca smirked. It's fine, Evie. We'll still be able to see inside, and it can't be that big, I said. Elam, were you ever in there when you were still alive? Never. By tradition, only the patriarch of the family was permitted access to this vault, a title which my father refused to pass down to me. He replied, Mind the P word in front of the witches. You'll get them all riled up. Seneca said, Wait, Elam had pussy in there, Rosalind asked. No, that's not what he said, I replied promptly. Seneca, Rose said that you already know how to open the vault, and that you just required Elam's presence. That's correct. The mechanical lock isn't actually all that sophisticated, and a bit of rudimentary safe cracking was all that was needed to work out the combination, he replied. There are 3 dials, each with 9 numbers apiece and a 7-digit code. But no matter what I try, every time I enter the combination, it realizes I'm not a crow, and the lock resets. I know how it works, Elam added. I just have to stand in front of the door and look the effigy of Artaxerxes in the eye as the combination is entered. But no member of the crow family ever tried getting into this vault from beyond the grave before, right? Genevieve asked. It obviously wasn't intended for that, being made out of cold iron. Has even a living crow just stood in front of the door while someone else input the combination? If the spell work here is as impenetrable as you think, this might not work. Artaxerxes obviously put a lot of work into this, and it's hard to imagine there are many contingencies he didn't anticipate, I agreed. Which is precisely why we'll all be standing well out of harm's way while Woodbead enters the code, Seneca explained, fetching a small folded piece of paper from his pockets. He'll read it off this, then destroy it immediately. He's more than willing to put his life on the line in the name of duty, and Elam's already dead, so he has nothing to worry about. Now places, everyone, places. I wanted to object, but Seneca's security guards had silently appeared and were already firmly ushering us to the threshold of the room. Woodbead was the only living person left inside, and he didn't appear to be the least bit reluctant. As uncomfortable as it made me, I didn't see any grounds for aborting the attempt. Seneca, if this is a repeat of what happened at Triskelion Theater, I swear to God, Genevieve began. A Wiccan's oath to the God of Abraham is hardly anything I take seriously. My dear, he cut her off. When you're ready, Mr. Woodbead. Woodbead bowed obsequiously and quickly began spinning the dials. Entering only one number at A, time as he moved from top to bottom, alternating between clockwise and counterclockwise turns. Elam gave me a reassuring nod, then turned to lock eyes with the iron face of his forefather. One by one, the tumblers fell into place, and when Woodbead entered the last digit, we all listened eagerly to see if the lock would either open or reset, but neither happened. Instead, the eyes of Artaxerxes Crow began to glow with the chthonic aura of the underworld, and we watched in dismay as the iron face moved its bearded mouth to speak. Familiar? The hoarse old voice asked softly, in disdain. Impossible. Your soul belongs to the dread Persephone. Too many of us failed to honor the pact you made with Persephone, and our bloodline came to an end, Elam explained, after only a moment of dismayed hesitation. But in my last month of life, I befriended a witch, and she renegotiated the pact you made. Thanks to her, my daughter and any other virtuous members of our family were freed from the unjust afterlife that you had condemned us to, and I am now bound to her as her spirit familiar. But dead or not, I am still the only crow who now walks the living earth, and everything in this vault is rightfully mine, so I command you to open. Renegotiated? The face asked, seemingly not caring about much else of what was said. How? What could she possibly have offered Persephone that was worth my entire bloodline? You, Elam replied smugly. She found that immaculate corpse of yours you hid in the mausoleum. Persephone was not at all pleased to learn that you had made a fool of her, and happily, okay, maybe not happily, but willingly took you in exchange for our freedom. You, the real you, is finally where he belongs. The face winced, partially in anger, but also in confusion. It seemed that if Artaxerxes had anticipated this outcome, he hadn't prepared for it. If Persephone had his soul, then all was lost, and nothing else mattered. What is that thing? Rosalind whispered. A golem, I think, I replied. I don't know what else it could be. A cold iron golem? Genevieve asked skeptically. How is that possible? I don't know. I'm a necromancer, not an alchemist, but Artaxerxes obviously figured out a way, I replied. Extraordinary, Seneca said, his eyes wide with wonder, as it dawned on him that the vault itself might actually be worth more than whatever was inside it. To think this has been under my nose all these years. Ah, Samantha, Elam called over his shoulder. I think it's glitching. The face seemed to be shaking now, gently vibrating the walls at a slow but steadily increasing rate. Its chthonic aura intensified, while all other light seemed to vanish. Tendrils of ghostly pale ectoplasm leaking from its eyes and lashing out at anything they could reach. Its mouth hung open in a faltering scream, not one of pain or fear or rage, but more simply of need. Like an infant, it instinctively knew that something was wrong, and all it knew to do in that situation was to cry louder and louder until its needs were answered. Have Woodbead reset the lock. That might put it back to sleep, I suggested. Woodbead, you are to do no such thing. This is the closest we've ever come to opening this door, Seneca countered. Elam, you do what you were summoned here to do, and make that door stop. Crying this instant. Ah, Golem? I say again. I am now the last crow upon the living earth, Elam said firmly. Your master forged you to serve his bloodline. So, he screamed in pain as he was ensnared in the golem's ectoplasmic tendrils, crumbling to his knees, and his astral form flickering out like a waning ember. Elam, I shouted, starting to bolt into the room before Seneca grabbed me by the shoulder. Don't be foolish. We don't know what that will do to you, he yelled. I appear to be unaffected, sir, though I do kindly request permission to make a timely retreat, Woodbead shouted. Granted, we need to get out of here before this whole building collapses, Seneca agreed. Never mind about Elam. He's a ghost. He'll be fine. You don't know that, and you don't know that Golem will stop after it's destroyed the house, I argued. We can't just run away. We need to put a stop to this. But Samantha, what can we do? Genevieve asked softly as she gazed upon the enormous, cold iron face in helpless horror. I thought for a moment, desperately trying to come up with anything we could do to bring it under control. It's a golem. It needs orders, I said, grabbing hold of the first pen and piece of paper I could find. With Artaxerxes, claimed by Persephone, its original orders are moot. It needs new ones. Are you daft? You can't write golemic script, especially for a golem you know nearly nothing about, Seneca objected. I've read Artaxerxes' journals and the other tomes he left in the cemetery, I countered, as I frantically scribbled away on the paper. I know a lot of what he knew, and I know a lot about how he thought. I can do this. Are those Sibylline sigils you're drawing? He asked in disbelief. It's a golem. The script needs to be in Hebrew. You said it yourself. A witch swearing by the God of Abraham isn't worth much, I replied, quickly folding up the paper. If it's sacred to me, it will still work. Samantha, what did you write? He demanded. No time, I claimed as I darted into the room. Seneca tried to come after me, but Genevieve was able to hold him back just long enough for me to make it to the vault. The tendrils of ectoplasm were dense but clustered enough that I could avoid them. The golem was screaming so loud now that it hurt my ears to stand so close to it. The air was vibrating so strongly that I feared that if I simply threw the paper into its mouth, it would just be blown backwards. So instead, I placed it upon its tongue as swiftly as I could. The instant I drew my hand back, the jaws snapped shut, and the screaming came to a sudden stop. Its glowing eyes locked with mine, and with a single, solemn nod, I knew that it accepted the new orders it had been given. The chthonic aura dissipated, the face fell still, and the vault door slipped ajar by the tiniest of cracks. Letting out a sigh of relief, I turned to check on Elam. He had demanifested, but I could still sense him through our bond, and I knew that he wasn't seriously hurt or banished back to the underworld. Seneca rushed straight to the door and tried to pry its mouth open, only to find that it was as if it were all one solid piece of iron. Samantha, what did you tell it to do? He demanded, looking at me as if a favorite pet had decided it liked me more than him. Essentially, I told it that since Artaxerxes had been laid to rest in Heroic Cemetery, the caretaker of that cemetery would logically be his caretaker as well, and in the absence of a living or otherwise acceptable crow, that caretaker would be who it should answer to. I admitted. That didn't conflict with any of its other scrolls. Luckily, so it accepted it, and you couldn't have told it to recognize the legal manager of the crow's estate instead? Seneca demanded, angrily enough that Genevieve assumed a defensive position between him and I. Do you really think that Xerxes wouldn't have explicitly told his golem to never accept you as its master? I asked rhetorically. No, no, I suppose not, he conceded with a defeated sigh, slowly regaining his composure. You unbelievable bastard, I finally shouted. You had it the whole time. You made us open this damn vault for you. For nothing, Genevieve screamed. Not for nothing. For this, as we agreed, he replied calmly. Why should I believe you? How do I know you didn't make that yourself? Or more likely ordered Woodbead to do it? I demanded. Now surely a witch of your talent would be able to tell a genuine prophecy from a humble forgery, he replied, proffering the envelope with a small flourish. I snatched it out of his hand and pulled out the folded sheets of torn-out notebook paper inside, reading over the nearly illegible scrawl as quickly as I could. You lied to us. We deserve to see what's inside that vault, Genevieve yelled. I did not lie. I had an honest lapse in memory, he lied. I'm well over 200 years old, you know. These things happen, but I'm afraid our transaction is complete. And quite frankly, you two have worn out your welcome. He snapped at his security guards and whistled for them to escort us out. Evie, it's fine, I said calmly as I put the paper back into its envelope and slipped it into my satchel. We got what we came here for. Let's just go. I turned around and took her by the hand, pulling her back out into the front yard. Of course, he said as he took in a deep breath and straightened up to his full height. He placed a hand on the vault's handle as if to open it, but then stopped abruptly. Oh dear, this is a bit embarrassing. It seems I've had a small lapse in memory. I actually did come across the documents you were looking for while I was sorting through the filing cabinets in the study. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope of rich, dark brown paper and held it out with a polite smile as I stared at him in utter disbelief. Dude, you didn't just lie to them. You lied to Ivy. You're going to be in so much shit for this, Rosalind told him as she chased after us, profusely apologizing as she ushered us back to the crossover. Before we stepped into the surveilled vehicle, but were well out of sight of Seneca and his goons, Elam manifested by my side and quickly leaned in to whisper something crucial into my ear. I memorized the combination Seneca wrote down, he said, before vanishing back into the ether. Tried not to visibly react, but I think I did smile just a little bit. All in all, it had been a pretty productive day. I woke up in my bathroom after I nearly drowned while taking a shower. The last thing I remembered is enjoying the high-pressure wash as the warm water pushed through my thinning hair. I closed my eyes, tilted my head back, immersed in steam and the aroma of lavender sea salt. Then I began to taste the sea salt. Somehow then, I began choking on it, choking on salt water. It burned my nostrils and filled my throat. I tried to spit it out, but only swallowed more. I was thrashing in slow motion. There was pressure all around me. I finally opened my burning eyes. I was in a warm sea. I felt my lungs fill with water, and I was sinking. Also, bleeding. Then the sharks came. I closed my eyes, felt a series of collisions, and surrendered to death. I felt every limb of my weakened body pound against a hard floor. I was shivering and slipping around, as though I had belly flopped onto a skating rink. From the ceiling rafters of an arena, naked, a high pressure shower of icy water tore through my spine, ceasing every muscle and shaking every bone in me. My stomach convulsed, regurgitating water with great force. My tongue hung out of my gaping mouth while I blew running water out of my nostrils. My eyes winked open, swelling with salty tears that began to warm my face. My head spun at the sight of my bathroom. Nobody was there, but I felt humiliated. If not for the word count requirement, I would have stopped the story here. But, anyways, here are a few more 100 words that describe what happened next. Slowly, I steadied my breath and focused my mind. I thought, I'm laid out in the 5x8 glass stall. That is my shower. The water is running cold because I've been out for a while. Not that long, though. I hear the bathroom fan whizzing above me, which means it's been under 40 minutes since I set it while preparing for a shower. Still shivering, I pushed my arms up and crouched on my knees. Then, I reached my right arm up to grab the wall handle and hoisted myself into a squat, just high enough to reach the water faucet and turn off the water. Finally, I stood to my feet and stepped out of my shower stall. I pulled a plush white towel toward me and wrapped my tangled, dripping silver hair. Not caring that it was still soapy, I wrapped a second towel around my hips and shrugged on my thick, pink Sherpa robe. I dropped into my embellished, white leather dressing chair, held my head in my hands, and began to howl aloud. My mind could not reconcile with what my body had just experienced, being in two completely different places at exactly the same time. I thought, where did I go? The ceiling fan stopped whizzing abruptly. I sat up unsteadily and pulled the towel off my head. My hair fell around my pale, long face like a pile of loose yarn. I drank a quart of whiskey from the bar fridge beside my bathroom wardrobe while I combed it out. By the time I stood up again, I felt comfortably numb. So I hung up my damp robe, dropped the towel from my hips to the old tiled floor, and walked through the bathroom door straight into my stuffy bedroom. I rolled into bed and slept soundly until the next afternoon. Every day, since this insane event, I've had this strange feeling, as if this reality, wherein I have lived for 46 years, feels untrue. This reality, after that insane experience, feels unreal, like this reality veils some other. I surrendered to death in that warm sea. But did I die out there? Am I dead out there now, while simultaneously living in my apartment? All this to ask, what would you do? I'm too scared to shower, and it's been over a week. Sponge bathing sucks, and this is too fucking embarrassing to hire help for or admit to outside of this post. Back in 1992, my dad and his colleague witnessed something truly stomach-churning during their duty as guards in a well-known subdivision in Singapore. The subdivision they worked in had many large houses, but very few people lived there. Throughout the day, fewer than 15 cars would enter or leave. It was so quiet, my dad called it a ghost town. When construction started at the back of the subdivision, the noise from their equipment was loud, but we never received complaints, likely because the residents rarely stayed home. 2 months after the construction began, a typhoon came, and unfortunately, only my dad and one of his co-worker showed up for duty. The rain was heavy, and they were sheltering in the small guardhouse near the subdivision gate around 10 p.m. They needed to report the subdivision's perimeter status to their superior officer, SO, so they went on rounds, braving the strong winds. The sound of the wind blowing through the trees was deafening. Visibility was zero. But as they passed a storm drain, they noticed something red mixed with the water. They immediately thought it was blood. They followed the trail, shining their flashlight on the flowing water. The road was inclined uphill, and at the top was a house. The blood was coming from the gate of that house. Being pushed out by the water, they knocked on the gate, but no one answered. His colleague peeked through the gate and saw a person's foot, but he couldn't see the entire body because the house blocked his view. My dad tried to call SO, but no one answered. After several attempts, the call was suddenly marked as unattended. Following protocol, my dad called the police since guards were no longer allowed to act on their own due to issues with the previous staff. While my dad was calling the police, his colleague got curious and went around to the back of the house. He climbed at the wall. Before my dad could pull him down, he immediately climbed back down. He said, "They're all gone." My dad decided to climb to see what he's talking about, and he saw 5 massive dogs, different breeds. They were drenched in rain, but unfazed by it, feasting on the mangled upper torsos of 3 men. 2 of the bodies had no heads, and the third still had a head, but no jaw. The heads were the first parts the dogs ate. The men's legs were nearly skeletonized, and the foot they saw by the gate had no body attached, just a foot. Moments later, 2 dogs, one black and one brown, with thick fur, were fighting over the intestines of the man who still had a head. The man's eyes opened and stared, crying, but a thin dog bit it, dragging him to a corner. The police finally answered the call. My dad gave them the address and begged them to come quickly, saying there might be nothing left. He said that because he could see the dogs were determined to finish off the 3 men. The police arrived at 1 a.m. They told them what they saw. Even the police were horrified by the scene. The police told them to step back, and all they heard after that were gunshots. Later, they learned that 6 larger dogs were killed by the police. One was found inside the house, chewing on human bones, while 5 were outside. 5 people died, 2 maids, and 3 men confirmed to be construction workers from the site behind the subdivision. The next day, SO called my dad and his colleague to the office. They handed each of them $20,000 SGD in exchange for their silence. They also promised to transfer them to a different post. They said the subdivision's management didn't want the incident to go public. The families of the deceased had already been compensated, paid by the homeowners. My dad later found out that the homeowners had entrusted their dogs to 5 maids while they went on vacation. However, 3 of the maids, who had been working there longer, left, leaving the 2 new maids who didn't know how to care for the dogs. The construction workers who stayed at the site had planned to rob the house, but even the police couldn't figure out how the dogs escaped or why they became so vicious. My dad believed the maids didn't feed the dogs after the homeowners left. Instead, they partied and abandoned the new maids, who didn't know what to do. A week had passed since the homeowners left, so the dogs were likely starving. In desperation, they may have escaped and attacked. To this day, my dad is now 57 years old and still traumatized by dogs, especially large dogs. That's why we only have cats in our house. Sorry if my grammar is bad. English is not my first language. As I'm making this public, I suppose I should probably let you all know who I am. The residents here call me a lot of things, some not so pleasant, but I won't share those. My name is Alexander, but I honestly don't really mind what you call me if you need to call me anything at all. I work as the manager of an apartment complex. It's nothing really that interesting. A lot of paperwork and a lot of sitting around doing nothing until a resident needs me or I need to handle a problem of some kind. One of the perks is that I have my own apartment here, rent-free, so I get to save some cash at least. They're lenient with pets too, so I was able to bring my cat Soot. She's a sweetheart. There is an odd thing about where I work though, something that I can't really explain how it works, but it just does, where I work both exists and doesn't exist, like some strange in-between state. Cryptic, I know, but let me try and explain it a little more. Normal mail can show up here and be sent from here just fine, as long as it's properly postmarked and such. Sometimes the occasional letter or package gets lost, but that's not my problem. However, if you try giving out the address to someone, it can't be found. GPS of any kind can't pick up where we are. And even if you give verbal directions, you practically need to hold someone's hand to come and find this place. And honestly, God help you if you order food to come right to your apartment. I've had to guide so many delivery people to apartments that it's become a routine answer for me on the phone to say, "All right, what time is your food coming down the street?" I wouldn't suggest trying to come and find this place. You'll most likely drive yourself mad, unless you're looking to move in here. Then I'll offer assistance to finding this location. I just hope you don't mind having some pretty odd neighbors. As for how I ended up being the manager of this place, I really just needed a job, and I wanted something that wasn't retail or food service. I'd been there, done that, and honestly, I'll never go back to that. I saw an ad online about a complex needing a new manager, and having some managerial experience, I put in for it, had the interview, went normal enough, and got the job within 2 weeks. I didn't know anything was wrong with this place when I got the job. It only started being noticeable when people were saying they legitimately couldn't find this place, even showing that it didn't appear at all on Google Maps. Where it was supposed to be was just empty, or the image would be corrupted. Then when I started actually meeting the residents, I began to understand a bit more, but I'll get into that on another day. The job pays well. I get a rent-free place to stay. I get to keep my cat, so I don't really have room to complain. I'll share noteworthy things as they happen, though. Maybe it'll give me something to do during my downtime, no matter if I was home, no matter if I was outside. They said not to look for the invisible ghost. Me and my family moved to Russia because my baby sister was born, and we didn't have much space in our house. Then one day, my dad got a job in Russia, so we moved to Russia. When we arrived at our new neighborhood, some people came to our doorstep and welcomed us. In the middle of talking, the people told our parents to bring me somewhere else, where I couldn't be there. Listening to their conversation, I wondered why they wanted me out of there, but I just didn't say anything and went into my room, though I could hear everything with my door open just a little inch. They were talking about the invisible ghost, that it always went to people's houses every night, At exactly 3:05, my mom was like, "Is this a prank or something to scare us out of this neighborhood?" The neighbor's tone turned serious, and they leaned in closer to my parents. "No, this is not a prank. The invisible ghost is a real entity, and it's been terrorizing our neighborhood for years. It's said to appear at exactly 3:05 a.m. every night, without fail." My mom raised an eyebrow, still skeptical. "And what does it do when it appears?" The neighbor hesitated, glancing around nervously. "Some people say it whispers terrible things in their ears. Others claim it manipulates their dreams, making them see and experience horrific things. And then there are those who say it's a harbinger of doom, a sign that something terrible is about to happen." My dad's expression turned grave. "We'll make sure to keep an eye out for it. Thank you for warning us." As the neighbors left, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Why did they seem so scared of this invisible ghost? And what did it really want? That night, I lay in bed, my ears perked up, waiting for 3:05 a.m. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural entities, but a part of me was curious. As the clock struck 3:05, I held my breath. At first, there was silence, but then I started to feel a creeping sense of dread. It was as if someone was watching me, lurking just out of sight. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "Ghosts watching." My heart skipped a beat. Who or what was behind that voice? And what did it want from me? Tap, tap, tap at the window. I froze, my heart racing, as I heard the faint tapping at the window. It was a soft, rhythmic pattern, like someone was trying to get my attention without being too loud. I slowly got out of bed and approached the window, my eyes scanning the darkness outside. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel a presence on the other side of the glass. As I peered into the night, I saw a figure standing just beyond the window, shrouded in shadows. The tapping grew more urgent, and I felt a chill run down my spine. And then I heard the whispering again, louder this time. "You should not have tried to leave." The doors and windows shook violently, as if the very foundations of the house were being torn apart. My family and I were paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. And then our eyes fell upon the crumpled piece of note under the couch. It was as if it had been deliberately placed there, waiting for us to discover it. The drawing of a black hole seemed to suck all the light out of the room, leaving only an eerie, pulsating darkness. The red letters beside it seemed to burn with an otherworldly intensity, as if they were a warning, a prophecy, or a promise. "In this void you will go." The words seemed to echo through my mind, resonating with a terrible, creeping sense of inevitability. It was as if we were being pulled toward some dark, abyssal fate, and there was nothing we could do to escape. My mom's voice was barely audible, faint whisper of terror. "What does it mean?" My dad's face was ashen, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but I think we're about to find out." My parents went into their room. As my parents emerged from their room, armed with the axe and bat, I could sense a mix of desperation and determination in their eyes. They were ready to defend us against whatever was coming our way. My mom held the axe tightly, its heavy blade glinting in the dim light. My dad gripped the bat firmly, his knuckles white with tension. "We need to get out of here," my dad whispered, his eyes scanning the room. "We can't stay trapped in this house." My mom nodded, her eyes fixed on the door. "We'll make a run for it. Stay close, and don't let go of your sister." I nodded, holding my baby sister tightly to my chest. I could feel her tiny heart racing with fear, and I knew I had to protect her at all costs. As we prepared to make our move, the house seemed to grow quieter, as if it was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down upon us. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The house was silent, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Knock, knock, knock at the door. The knocking was slow, deliberate, and menacing. It echoed through the darkness, making my heart skip a beat. My parents exchanged a nervous glance, their eyes gleaming with fear in the dim light. My mom's grip on the axe tightened, while my dad's hand clenched around the bat. I held my baby sister closer, trying to shield her from the terror that was unfolding. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. It was as if whatever was on the other side of the door was determined to get our attention. My dad's voice was barely above a whisper, "Don't answer it." But it was too late. The knocking had already stopped. Instead, I heard a low, ominous whispering, "Let me in or consequences." As the figure's eyes glowed brighter, its body began to contort and twist, like a puppet on a string. Its limbs elongated and distorted, taking on unnatural shapes. My mom's grip on the axe faltered, and she stumbled backward, horror etched on her face. My dad's eyes were frozen on the figure, his bat slipping from his grasp. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure's eyes seemed to be burning with an otherworldly intensity, and I felt myself being drawn into their depths. The figure's body continued to twist and contort, its skin rippling and bubbling like a living thing. And then, in a voice that was both familiar and yet completely alien, it spoke, "I am you." I was shocked and horrified as the figure transformed into a twisted, psycho version of my mom. Her eyes, once warm and loving, now blazed with a manic intensity. Her pupils constricted into tiny, venomous dots. Her skin was deathly pale, pulled taut over her cheekbones, and her smile was a grotesque, exaggerated parody of her normal warm smile. She looked like a caricature of my mom, a twisted, nightmarish version that seemed to be fueled by a malevolent energy. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice shaking with fear. "What's going on?" The psycho mom's eyes locked onto mine, and she began to laugh, a cold, mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I'm the real mom," she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "And you will obey." My real mom's eyes were wide with terror as she stared at the twisted, psycho version of herself. She looked like she was frozen in shock, unable to move or speak. The psycho mom began to move closer to me, her eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity.